燃え上がれガンダム。Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wacky and wild world of Mobile Suit Gundam, to take a look at a blast from the past, Jonathan, because we are going back to Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam. But we're not watching the TV show again. We are watching a trilogy of movies released in 2005 and 2006 that repackages the 50-episode TV show into three 90-minute movies called collectively Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam, A New Translation.
Yes, which it is technically in the chronology we're doing, because this was right after Mobile Suit Gundam Seed Destiny and before Gundam 00. This is the first time Yoshiyuki Tomino returns to the franchise after Turn A Gundam, and he won't do anything with it again until G-Reco, right? Like 10 years later.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So
we're back in Tomino's playhouse.
Yes. Obviously, Gundam has a storied history with these kind of movies because it was the three original Gundam movies in 1981 and 1982, which we reviewed on, I think it's episode 6 of Weekly Suit Gundam, that really brought the series to massive, national popularity within Japan and is a big moment in the history of anime. So Tomino going back 20 years later and doing the same sort of thing for Zeta Gundam is an enticing proposition. And I know these have been kind of a curiosity for us, Sean, and something we've wanted to talk about. So now, since we are at the point in the series' lifespan where these came out, now seemed like the right time.
Yeah. So this is interesting because this is one of the rare times where we are watching something that this is the first time I have properly watched these movies, because I never really kind of spent the time to sit down and watch them because, like I said, they are effectively, it's just Zeta Gundam recut and re-edited for 3 movies with new footage made. A lot of the new footage is made mostly to sort of make coverage for scenes and changes and things to compress the time. Although as the movies go on, they spend a little bit more just being like, let's just make this look cool, so let's reanimate it. But it is, the core story is more or less Zeta Gundam, with the exception of one very major change they make right at the very end. So I never really spent the time to watch it since it wasn't a new story, but I did several years ago watch, just out of curiosity, a bunch of the new footage and watched the ending of the 3rd movie and stuff like that. So I knew what these movies were. I had some experience with them, but the last couple of days is the first time I actually sat down and watched them properly and kind of consumed all of the new scenes and new footage in their context.
Yes, and obviously recap movies are not rare in Gundam. Most Gundam series have some kind of recap movie, whether it's the full thing or if it's something like Miller's Report for 8th MS Team, which was the series up to that point for an anime festival, but there were more episodes to do. So there's a lot of these, and for the most part we're not talking about those because for the most part they are not historically remarkable. We did talk about the 3 movies for original Gundam because those are historically very remarkable. And as we found when we watched them, they're extremely good. I mean, they're just, they stand on their own. They're fantastic. I think you and I would both still say that the TV series is the best overall version of that. But the movies are very, very good. They stand on their own just fine. I would be happy if someone was like, I in no way will watch 43 episodes of anime. I would be like, well, then watch 3 movies. They would work that way. I've seen them several times. I think they're great. And so I've been very curious, and I've been kind of holding off. I've been wanting to watch these, but holding off until we did a podcast on it, so I could go in fresh. Because I'm really curious what Tomino would do with Zeta, which is a much harder task, and I think that's where we kind of have to start. is, OG Gundam doing 3 movies. Well, that's tough. It's a big, complicated story, but it's 43 episodes. He had 2.5 hours for each movie. Those are long movies, the original Gundam movies.
Yeah.
And, original Gundam also has sort of enough of an episodic structure that one of the big strategies Tomino and company employed on those movies is that they cut out a lot of individual episodes, and where they kept stuff in, they would tend to keep in the bulk of full episodes. So you were seeing stuff largely in its proper context. It was pretty rare that they would, drastically have to cut something down. Like Coming Home is just Coming Home. The whole episode is in there, and some of it is recontextualized, and there's some new animation, but it's there. And of course, it also had the benefits of, especially in that 3rd movie, some just spectacular new animation. And because it was made roughly contemporaneously with the show, it all blends together very well, too. It's hard to spot the seams. Zeta Gundam has a tougher job.
Yeah.
Zeta Gundam is 50 episodes. It is a vastly more complicated story, because it is not a simple, here's one side, here's another side, one side is Space Hitler, the other side isn't perfect, but there are heroes. Zeta Gundam is multiple factions. There's a lot of politics going on. There are dozens of characters, most of whom die. You have a new protagonist in Camille, but you also have returning characters from the original cast. You have a million things going on. And the Zeta Gundam movies are between 90 and 100 minutes, not 140 minutes. So, and when they do new animation, they are doing it in 2005, not in 1985. So there are a lot of challenges on Yoshiyuki Tomino's plate in doing a new translation. And I was so fascinated to see how he would do this. And for me, I'm kind of glad I watched it now, because it's been enough time since I've seen Zeta Gundam, and I've only seen it once. I felt like I got to go in with pretty fresh eyes. You know the story of Zeta better, because you've seen it at least twice. Have you seen it 3 times?
I've seen it 3 times, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. But yeah, so I think that sets the stage well enough for this crazy task Yoshiyuki Tomino set himself.
Yeah, so do you want to do first impressions, or do you want to jump into the history of how these movies came about first?
Let's do first impressions. I'll start. I usually start, even though this time we're both new to it.
Yep.
Yoshiyuki Tomino is a magician. These are not perfect. They do not work entirely. They work, though, given everything I just said. I think these movies work so much better than they have any right to. I found them extremely riveting. I was glued to my seat for every minute of all 3 movies. I think they leverage a lot of what is great about Zeta Gundam. I think I have one giant asterisk with them, and that giant asterisk is the ending, and we will get to that. But I was very entertained and impressed. I don't think they are as good as the Mobile Suit Gundam original movies. In some ways, though, I'm even more impressed at Tomino's skills in doing an insane amount of narrative in a compressed amount of time. He is a fucking magician.
Yeah, I think in many ways my impressions are not that different, other than that I didn't enjoy them that much. Other than the 3rd movie. Yeah. I liked the 3rd movie quite a bit, mostly because the 3rd movie has the cleanest job in terms of what it can cut out. And so the 3rd movie just feels like you are fucking shooting the last 10 episodes of Zeta Gundam into your goddamn veins, and that was kind of great. Because the whole time I watched the 3rd movie, I was just kept on exclaiming, the ending of Zeta Gundam is so fucking good. Yes. And then they ruin the last beat, but everything up to that moment is the exact same, which is kind of why the last beat doesn't work. But I think the first movie, the first 40 minutes in particular, the first movie, I just found mostly just kind of delirious. It is so, it has such a hard job trying to set up. It does, I think, an okay job at setting up Camille. I think the rest of what is happening just zooms by in that movie, and it's the kind of thing where I suspect if you had no background in, and actually I don't have to suspect because I did read a lot of reviews from when these movies came out. If you had basically no background in Zeta Gundam, say you watched, you know what Mobile Suit Gundam is, so you're not confused about what a Char is and that kind of stuff. But you never actually watched the Zeta Gundam itself. I think that first movie would be largely incomprehensible until about the midpoint. And I think the second movie has a lot of good stuff, but I think that's also where you feel how much is lost by large sections having to be cut out, and some stuff that is left in, all the stuff with Sarah in Armstrong Plaza feels like it's there because it needs to be, but it is not the most interesting stuff to like be in a Zeta story. So I think those two movies, they are 1,000 times better than they have any right to be. They should be utter trash fires, and they're not. Like, I do think there's lots of good stuff. Some of the new scenes are quite good. I think there are like flashes of like brilliance at like where compressing things down juxtaposes some stuff and sort of pushes some things to the front line. That is like more in the background of the TV show because there's so much other material that it's working through that I think moments like that really shine. Like, I think the ending of the first movie is fantastic. There's some stuff in the second movie that's great. But I found a lot of it feeling like in those first two movies, there's maybe about like 30 distinct scenes that are just mobile suits launching. Not like 30 shots, 30 different scenes of mobile suits launching from their base or their cruiser, because it is so many fight scenes stacked on top of each other because the plot can't be compressed to make them one big fight scene. So like that kind of stuff, I think the movie just struggles so hard with trying to find a way to work with what it can without just completely redoing it because they don't have the budget or time to totally reanimate the movies. So I think like it is a thing where the movies are way better than they should be, but I did find the first two movies pretty tedious for long stretches of them.
Yeah, so it sounds like this is going to be a difference of like degrees, not, entire like conclusions. Because I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying, but at the same time, I just, I'm someone who thinks very structurally about film and narrative and analytically in this kind of academic sense, and just everything you said is true. And I do think one of the weaknesses is, like, this was a slight weakness in the original Gundam movies, but it's something actually they were pretty able to overcome in terms of combining fight scenes and feeling like climaxes happen in the proper places, whereas in the Zeta Gundam movies, as you say, there are just a million action scenes, and sometimes you'll get the Gundams, like, taking off, and then they'll have to, like, excise the action scene, and then you'll come back to them, like, landing, and then they'll take off again. But at the same time, you can just feel how thoughtful Tomino and company are being behind the scenes of it's not just how much footage can we fit in these 95 minutes. I do feel like actual thought and care has gone into, with the limitations they have in front of them, what is movie one? What is the arc? Why do we start here and why do we end here? What are roughly the 3 acts of this thing? What is Camille's journey from this point to this point? Who is the person we're mainly following? And, like, I think they do a pretty good job centering Camille in all of this, because one thing I was worried about is that if you're just doing the highlights, does Camille kind of get lost in the shuffle? And I actually think the character who gets lost in the shuffle a little bit is Char.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because he's just sort of purely plot functional in these. But it's not his story. So I also think that's like, if you have to make the sacrifice, that's probably where I do it too, if you made me make 3 90-minute movies out of Zeta Gundam. So I don't know. I just, there is something, so there is an article by Hayao Miyazaki in his book Starting Point. And I think it's from it's an introduction he wrote to Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru when it came out on Laserdisc in Japan. And he makes this comparison that I think about all the fucking time, where Miyazaki compares, he says, a good movie or a good work of art, a good TV show, he compares it to, and I forget the name of it, but it's a kind of Japanese rolled candy. It's kind of like a Tootsie Roll in America, where it's like a long, like, rolled up kind of thing of candy, and you split it into pieces. And he says, and the thing about a good movie is it's like one of those. If you split it into pieces and you just take one piece out, it is still that thing. It is still just as tasty. And what he's saying is that he sometimes likes to sit down and watch Kurosawa's movies in little chunks, and then he'll turn it off because he's like, that was too sweet for me. I've gotten what I needed. But I like that theory of, like, it's kind of like if you put good in, you get good out. And there is something just like the sheer virtuosity of Zeta Gundam as like a production, and its action choreography, and its voice acting, and its storytelling. This is not the definitive way to experience this thing. I will never say that. You should watch the TV series. But it is striking to me how much of the brilliance comes through relatively undiluted. I found it oftentimes pretty breathtaking. And maybe it's because I've only seen the TV series once, and I just am jonesing for some more Zeta Gundam, and it felt fresher to me that way. But I was really struck by these films, and I know we're still on first impressions, so we can get into detail on all of this later, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it is just I think like the movies are very fascinating from like a theoretical point of view for me. Like I think because I agree. I think there is like so much thoughtfulness that goes into what do we do to efficiently manage to convey as much of the plot, the themes, the ideas, and as much as we can the characters. Like the character stuff is what gets like the most hurt. Like Char and Amro's, like most of their character stuff gets jettisoned. Like four, I think it gets kind of turned almost into a slightly different character. So it's like some of that stuff gets really harmed if you have an attachment to the original. But like with this impossible project of taking a very, very convoluted, like there are a few anime that are like good and this convoluted as Zeta Gundam, and taking that 50 episodes, compressing that into three 90-minute movies, which is a much, 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 much harder task than they had with the original trilogy of Mobile Suit Gundam films, as you outlined earlier. That for them to be able to do it and then like have it work as well as it does, and like you said, like it gets most of the gist across. Like there are like major elements of Zeta that I think the first two movies kind of miss, that hurt them a lot. But the third movie being as effective as it was can only be true if the first two movies were doing enough of their job in setting it up and kind of like building up those themes within the accelerated version of the story that the movies present. So like I do think the movies are like fairly successful in many ways, even if ultimately I didn't necessarily like enjoy them as a film viewing experience. I enjoyed them as like an intellectual thought process on the structure of storytelling, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So I'll just say, like, to end our first impressions, if you are a Zeta Gundam fan, you should watch these. They're really fascinating. I would highly recommend taking the 4 or 5 hours that it takes to go through these and watch them, because it's a really interesting experiment. And, you know, I also think it's interesting also just to see where Tomino has made changes and how he is a different artist in 2005 than he was in 1985. Some of those moments that we're going to get into, they're very worth watching. If you have seen Zeta Gundam. I want to make that clear.
If you have not seen Zeta Gundam, these movies will not work for you. Like, I just don't
Probably
think
not.
you can... I don't think you can have the context to, like, kind of understand what they're doing for large stretches.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, with that in mind, we should also say, like, the recap movie is a distinct phenomenon in Japanese anime. And it's frankly a distinct phenomenon in Japan, in Japanese anime, because mostly the recap animes don't get distributed overseas. They don't get seen. The international fandom doesn't really engage with them. A lot of them never even get home video releases. Like, you know, and I would say these are not recap movies. These are a step above a recap movie. They are much more produced. But, like, you know, I do not think the expectation by Tomino in making these movies, unless you have evidence that contradicts this, Sean, is that the main audience will be people who have never heard of Camille Bidan before. You know, like, I don't tend to think that the main goal is like, I'm going to do this story for a bunch of people who have never seen Zeta Gundam. You know, because part of the fun of when you do these recap movies in theaters is going to the theater and for like recap style ass recap movies that are just clip shows, it's going and seeing the animation on the big screen and having fun with it that way. This is, like we said, it's a step above that. It's a more produced thing. But the tradition of, like, the faster-paced movie cut-down version of this anime is not something, like, so alien to a Japanese anime watching audience that, like, it would kill the experience in the way, like, if you just gave these cold to someone in America, that'd be crazy. But that person doesn't exist in the same way in the Japanese fandom, I would say. So, yeah.
Yeah, so let's jump into the sort of the history of how these movies came about. So really the history of these movies starts in the 90s, because in the 90s, Tomino got an offer more or less from Sunrise to say, like, hey, the Mobile Suit Gundam original trilogy of movies did great at the box office, right? The third movie was like the fourth highest grossing movie in the domestic box office in Japan the year it came out. So it's like those movies did incredibly well. They're like, hey, let's do Zeta. People like Zeta. It had been like 10 years or something when this offer came up. And from what I can tell based on interviews with Tomino, like he had sort of like, with some people, they kind of like brainstormed the project a little bit. I believe the subtitles for the first two movies came from that and are unchanged. And the third one, they had changed. The original subtitle of the third movie was different. But like a lot of like the sort of thought process kind of got started around that project. And then he just kind of ultimately decided not to go forward with it. And so then that went on hold. And then about 10 years after that, for what was announced during the 25th anniversary of Gundam, which was 2004, and then to be released on the 20th anniversary of Zeta Gundam, which is 2005, they decided, let's go forward, let's make this trilogy of Zeta Gundam movies. There was like, with the original project, they were originally kind of scoping it to be maybe more like split between 3 movies, or they kind of thought to do 2 movies. For this, they're like, let's do 3 movies, about 90 minutes. And that's where they started coming up with, let's do new animation. Let's do what you can to make the animation blend as much as possible, but don't compromise the cinematic animation for 2005. So it's like they went through this like whole kind of thought process on how to try to do this. And for Tomino, a big motivation for him was one, to just kind of like look back on Zeta, which is one of his more beloved series that he had done, and he specifically wanted to like do a new translation of it, right? That word, like that phrase, a new translation, that is not the like English localized version of these movies or something. That is in the original Japanese release. That is what they are called. And so the idea was to translate it forward, both to update the story to be something that is consumable by a modern audience with like the newer animation stuff that they put into it, but then also for Tomino to look at that story that when he was a creator in the 80s and the 90s, so much of his ethos, and like the late 70s, like even the shit he did before Mobile Suit Gundam is grim. Like a lot of his like instincts as a storyteller were fairly grim, to go pretty dark, and that is where you eventually get, you know, everybody's beloved name for him, Kill 'Em All Tomino, because dude likes to kill his fucking characters off, right? And so he had that reputation for a long time, and then in the late 90s, and this is kind of something we talk about in Turn A Gundam with, is he shifts more as a creator. And also, like, I think it is unfair to only characterize his older works as being, like, grim or dark or whatever, because he does have stuff like Double Zeta that is more uplifting, and he kind of would trade it off. But definitely his instincts around Turn A Gundam and forward are to be more hopeful and more positive in his storytelling. So that's part of the point of these new translation movies, is to say, let's take the story of Zeta Gundam and turn it into, the word they keep on using, the best translation I can figure for in English is to like make it a like healthy, vigorous story that ends with hope. And that is not just like what the internal like thought process was, that is also how these movies were explicitly advertised. It was well known by the time of the release of the first movie that the ending of the third movie would be something that would be different than what you saw on the TV show, and probably would be a happy ending. Like I read a number of different movie reviews that were released around when the movies actually came out, because like with Seed and Seed Destiny, we are now at the point where you can kind of like find stuff easier on the internet from the period when the stuff was released for me to read. And overall, like the reviews for these movies were very mixed. Not a lot of people were like super positive about them. Some people hated them. A lot of people like saw them as kind of interesting, but didn't necessarily love them. But in most of their views, I saw lots of comments about people talking about, even when they were reviewing the first movie in 2005, that's like wondering about what is the ending going to be like what is the happy ending, like the tagline for the third movie, like there were a couple of taglines it had, all of them like intimating something about a different conclusion to Zeta Gundam, like who will will they be able to find the warmth in space? Is there someone who will save us? Like they kind of marketed it around this idea of the ending will be different, which I think then when you actually see how they executed it, it is very disappointing how the ending is different. But that was sort of the thought process, was to take this more bleak kind of work, and for Tomino to revisit it, repackage it together, do all this new work animating it. It is the staff on the project is an interesting mix of people who were working on the Gundam stuff in the 80s, some like Zeta, some of the other stuff in the 80s, and then lots of new people who are working at Sunrise coming to it as well. And so, yeah, like that's basically how the movies come about. They release, like the first movie releases May 2005, the second movie October 2005, the third movie March 2006. And one thing I think is interesting, you can kind of see where like the public interest in the movies starts to wane, because the first movie makes basically 860 million yen at the box office. The second movie makes 600 million yen. The third movie makes 490 million yen. Which is like way better than a normal recap movie. Like the Turn A Gundam recap movies collectively made about like 150 million yen. So like normal recap movies do not do like gangbusters at the box office. So these movies did like way better than a normal recap movie, but also by the time you're getting 490 million yen, converting like yen into dollars, I don't want to do it because it's like too much on my brain. But 490 million yen at the box office, that's also not great for these movies either. For like the amount of extra effort they went into to reanimate about like 60% of that movie. So yeah, so like I think the public reception to it was like fairly mixed when it came out, I guess, was something I noticed when I was doing my research.
Yeah, and obviously if you hold it up to the box office of the original trilogy movies, I mean those were genuine sensations. I don't have the data in front of me, and you would have to adjust for time, but like it was, this is not in that exact same like hit legacy. But yeah, I mean, and I do wonder like how an audience that was coming up on like Gundam Seed and Seed Destiny would react to Zeta, because this is still, it's changed, but it is still Zeta at heart, and it is just a very different thing. Like and it is kind of funny to juxtapose this with Seed Destiny, because even in truncated form, this is still a much, much better sequel than Seed Destiny is.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, I have my problems with these movies, but like, it's still Zeta Gundam. So yeah. Yes, it's still a lot better of a sequel than fucking Seed Destiny is.
Yeah, so interesting. Well, where do you want to start with talking about the movies themselves?
Let's start with the beginning. Let's just talk about the first movie. Let's talk about that opening act of that first movie, because there's a lot of shit that they need to compress to onboard an audience into Zeta Gundam.
So the first movie is called Heirs to the Stars. I do love the titles of these movies. I think they're very good. So the first movie is Heirs to the Stars, and yes, I did not have as many problems as you did with the opening of the movie, but I mean, let's just go through the numbers here. When we reviewed Zeta Gundam back in the day, like 2 years ago on this show, it was like episode 7 or something, our Zeta Gundam review, I noted that I felt like I sat down and watched the first 5 episodes in a run. And I basically, I didn't plan that. I didn't look up where should I watch to. It was just I started watching, and I kept watching until I felt like I had some kind of handle on what this show was doing. And in OG Gundam, that's 2 episodes. The first 2 onboard you perfectly. Even the first 1, you could argue. But like those first 2, you have things in place. I think for Zeta Gundam, you could argue it's even more than 5. But the 5th episode is where Camille's dad dies after his mom has died. And like the Argama is away from danger for a little bit. So those first 5 feel like that. And that's what the first 40 minutes of this movie are. So like, and if you go back to the original Gundam movies, so the first Gundam film in 1981, it does the first 2 episodes of Gundam mostly intact, with very few cuts and some changes here and some new animation. But mostly it is just the first 40 minutes or those first 2 episodes. Zeta Gundam has to do 5. And in those 5 episodes, you are introducing Camille, you are introducing Emma Sheen, you are introducing Quattro Bagina, who we already know because it's Shuichi Ikeda, but he's in a very new situation. You've got Captain Bright around the edges. You've got the Titans, and you have Jared Hyman. His name is not Hyman. It's what is his last name?
Jared's last name is Mesa. You're thinking of Hyman Jamatov.
Jamatov. Sorry. You also meet him though.
Yes. You meet Bask you meet Camille's parents, you meet Fa Yuri.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have a lot. And you meet a lot of characters in the beginning of regular Gundam too, but again, 2 episodes, not 5. So yes, it is wild. I mean, this like to the degree that this introduces Camille in a different place than the show does, which is not true at all of Amuro in the Gundam movies. Yeah.
So yeah, like I think part of what makes the opening 30 minutes to me, or the 30 to 40 minutes, is like incomprehensible is too much, but it's like it is too much for its own good. Is like there are, and this is something that I think is most obvious in the opening of the first movie, but it is true throughout all 3 of these movies. Like there are like sometimes just like really blatant continuity errors that exist because of the blending of new footage, old footage, stuff like that. Like there are shots where Camille is totally fine, and they'll cut to his POV, and they'll cut back to him, and all of a sudden he's covered in bruises because it is taken literally from a different episode. And there are moments like that are sprinkled throughout the opening. There's like things like Camille knows Emma Sheen and Captain Bright's names without ever having learned that information on screen in a way that is like very like disorienting. And there's a lot of stuff like that in that opening section where small little pieces of information are sort of excised because it needs to move at such a fast pace that like I feel like it is occasionally disorienting where you're not sure, is this something that they're going to, you know, because some of that stuff like with Jared they then cover in a flashback type structure, but some of it's just like you are waiting to know, is this something that they're going to present more information about, or are they just going to move forward with like what feels like a vague continuity error introduced by using some of the existing dialogue, like lines of dialogue. All the voice acting is re-recorded, but using some like the existing script, but having changed the editing. And there are like lots of weird inconsistencies like that sprinkled throughout that first 30 minutes or so, that I find like took me out of the movie a lot in the opening of the first one.
Yeah, I didn't notice the visual discontinuities as much because I feel like I was just like, so locked into like trying to keep up with it. I mean, it is fast, and I agree. I think the first half of the first movie is probably the roughest stretch. I think the second half of the first movie is so strong it kind of made up. It kind of rebounds for me in a way where I did feel like I came out of that movie on such a high. But yes, I mean, so I have mixed feelings about this because some of the moves I think are very canny, and some of them I think are very ill-advised, and some of them I think are kind of in the middle. So like where Camille is introduced in this. In the original Zeta Gundam, we meet him with Fa, very much like Amuro. You know, it's sort of that start of him in his milieu with his girlfriend, who's not his girlfriend, that sort of thing, right? And then he meets Jared, and he gets mad, and he punches him in his smug Nazi face. That's great. In this movie, all of that is cut, and we meet him in the prison, or not the prison, but like the interrogation room, where one of the Titans is like drilling him. And on one level, I find that kind of canny because it is a striking introduction, and what it allows is it's that kind of like cop movie introduction where the interrogator is like reading his rap sheet. So as a character introduction, it works fine. But the problem is that then so much of Camille's actions past that point do rely on him having this beef with Jared, and they have to like be like, oh, that's the guy I punched, but you didn't see him get punched. And then later they do show the punch in a brief flashback, but without the context. And it's a little whiplashy where like I would have tried to edit it in such a way to de-emphasize his relationship with Jared, because I think it could work if you did that. But without reanimating way more than they did, I don't know if that's possible. So there's just a lot there in terms of having to figure all of that out.
Yeah, because it does, I think, like, the difficulty it has is, and this is, like, true of all three of these movies, is that Zeta Gundam as a series is one that requires the viewer to, like, pay the utmost attention, particularly once you get, like, way further into it, like, the ending stretch. You have to, like, be really sort of, like, reading between the lines of lots of scenes and character dialogue and things like that, and big moments and big character dynamics can be expressed in very small, fleeting things that if you're not really paying attention, it kind of zooms by you. And that's like one of the reasons why I think Zeta Gundam is, of all the Gundam shows, I think the one I enjoyed the most on rewatch, or like my impression of it improved the most on rewatching it, because like when you go in with that foreknowledge, you can absorb that information a lot better. The thing that then causes, though, is that if you need to compress it, it becomes really difficult to find those ways to express some of those character ideas. And one of those is with Camille's, like, stealing of the Gundam Mark II at the beginning of Zeta Gundam. Like, it is a really drastic move the character makes that you have very little context for understanding why he is doing that. I think that's one of the things that I overall think the idea of starting with the interrogation is really cool. But the problem is that then that immediately leads into the way that they've edited it, him stealing the Gundam, and that's so sudden of a transition from you being introduced to this character, and then about 5 minutes later he is stealing this mobile suit, and it's, you know, it's very different than Amuro. Like, Amuro can get into the mobile suit very quickly because, I mean, one, he doesn't even get in that quickly in that movie, but he can get in quickly because he's under threat and he's trying to protect himself. With Camille, it is this proactive decision he makes to spite people by stealing the Gundam. And I feel like you need a more gradual setup to make that character choice register more cleanly for the audience. And I think that's one of the difficulties that the opening has, and that's why it feels so frantic, is because like Camille is doing stuff that feels like the choices a character would be making at like in the midpoint or even at the end of one of these movies, not like 5 minutes into a film.
And even in the show, him stealing the Gundam is episode 2. It's not episode 1. It's we've been with him for a full episode. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the decisions that gets the least attention. And I mean, this is also a stretch though where, you know, there are stretches of these movies where I can like maybe point to what I would do differently. I don't know what I like. It's really hard to say what the hell you would do to do this. And I guess what I would say is that I do think, here's the thing about movie 1. I think if this movie were roughly the length of like the Gundam 79 movies, like 140 minutes, I think what they've chosen as the domain of movie 1 is fucking perfect. Because I think it's that intro, which is like your first act, those first 5 episodes, and then once the Argama is off and it's in space and they're on their mission, everything, and they've made very smart editorial decisions to streamline this, where they plant the flag for you very early that the AUG's mission is to do this strike on Jaburo. And so the entire movie is about getting to Jaburo and doing that strike, and then the immediate aftermath, which is where Amuro comes in. And so it has this narrative thrust that is really strong for a movie, I think. And it's part of why the second half of this movie honestly works very well for me. And a lot of the cuts, because you're cutting around that central like spine that you've given it, is it allows the cuts to have a lot of latitude. The problem is that first act just needs to be longer to fit all of that in. Like, in the 140-minute version of this movie, I think the extra 40 minutes are primarily going to that first act, you know? Because you just need a little more of the time. I do think, like, ultimately you probably do need Camille introduced punching Jared. You need just a little more of how fucking angry he is. Because, like, it sort of struck me that a lot of the anger that is directed at his parents isn't fully expressed in the movie version until his scenes with 4 in movie 2. Because they just kind of get lost in the shuffle in movie 1. So yeah, that is obviously where the difficulties are. But also in 95 minutes, I have no fucking idea how I'd do this. It's better than I would make.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is like, will be a refrain throughout these discussions, is like, me criticizing things that are in the movie is not me saying like there's a better way to do this. It is a recognition of this is like a stupid thing to have tried to do with the restrictions that they had. like there's just, I don't think for me personally, I don't think there is a way to make 3 90-minute movies adapting a 50-episode TV show of Zeta Gundam without totally reanimating it. Like, I think using so much of the existing footage structs them in, like, puts them into this box where, like, if they just edited Jared out, if you could do a version where you could edit Jared out, which they kind of almost need to, because his stuff just gets so cut down in movie 2, and then movie 3 he's like such an afterthought. It feels like it's this thing where it's like the character isn't as relevant as he is in the TV show version. That's like, if they could just get rid of Jared and find like some other kind of catalyst that would be like easier to get through, it would like expedite so much of what is happening in the plot of the first movie. That would give them so much space. But you can't edit Jared out because you're using the existing footage. Like, I don't think there's any way you could have like cut around that and still make it work, because it is still the inciting incident of the plot. So yeah, like, I just think these movies have this absurd challenge in front of them because they have to use so much of the existing footage in order to be like cheap enough to produce, because they wouldn't ever fund a like full reanimated version of this story. It would be extremely expensive. So yeah, so like, criticizing these movies is not me saying like I think they could have done something different, is me saying fuck, this would be hard to do.
Right. That's a question though, Sean. If they had done like so this is not a perfect comparison, but a la Hideaki Anno doing Neon Genesis Evangelion again, and those are obviously all completely new animation. They're also mostly new plot. But like, if they had done the new version of Zeta Gundam, and a new translation was 3 90-minute, like the same length, but it's new animation all the way through, and they still roughly had the 3-part structure they've given it, how well do you think that would work? I feel like a lot of the flaws we're going to point to could be ironed out within roughly the same structures if there was stuff they could do, like just don't have Jared in the movies because there's no room for him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think the instincts of like where to end and like start and end the movies are always really good. Like the ending of movie 1 is the best part of movie 1, and the ending of movie 2 is like one of, if not the best part of movie 2 as well. Like I think they know the shape of the overall story, and like some of the cuts they make, well, it's like it's always hard because I love the TV show so much. Like some of the cuts of like for the third movie, they cut out like the Dakar stuff completely. Like that hurts because that like really kills Char's character arc. But Char's not the protagonist, so if you have to kill a character arc, get rid of like that part of Char's. So yeah, like I think their instincts are like spot on. It's just a lot of it is you have to spend so much time doing stuff that you shouldn't have to spend time doing. Like, let's launch the Gundams and have a brief little fight scene, and then come back and then launch the Gundams again and have a brief little fight scene, because this was 5 episodes with 5 distinct fight scenes that you can't really edit together. Whereas if you're making a new movie, you would just compress that into one big fight scene in the middle of the movie and not have leave, come back, leave, come back, leave, come back, leave, come back. And that kind of like very choppy pace that the fights have. You could get rid of that completely if you're just reanimating it.
Well, while we're talking about reanimation, should we just cover one of the elephants in the room that affects all 3 of these movies, which is... Okay. So the animation, half of it, not half of it, the bulk of it is old footage. And then you have this new animation, and obviously the contrast is stark. There is no way it could not have been stark. This is TV animation done in 4:3 on film with physical ink and paint, no computers involved in 1985, and then new animation done in 2005 in widescreen, in HD, digitally, basically, with digital ink and paint, with computer systems. I will say, I think it blends as good as it possibly could, given all of that. Like, they have clearly made some choices to try to make it blend better. So I think the animation style they employ in the new footage is very clearly trying to mimic what they did in 1985. Down to, like, they make color decisions that modern Gundam does not make. Like, Captain Bright's hair. If you look at like Unicorn Gundam, it's more black with like a green outline. They use like a similar shade of green they used in 1985. They make choices like that. They have clearly applied, and I'm not sure without like asking someone involved in the production, I couldn't know. I don't know if they printed this out to film and then rescanned it, or if they applied some kind of digital grain filter, but there is a 35 millimeter-ish grain field over all of the footage, the original stuff and the new stuff, and that is there no matter what. It's not like you cut from old TV footage to the new stuff and there's suddenly no grain and it looks like Gundam 00 or something from the mid-2000s that was purely digital. There's a concerted effort to try to make it like functionally look the same. Backgrounds in the new stuff are done really similarly, and sometimes I'm pretty sure they're reusing backgrounds from the 1985 show.
Yeah, they do occasionally do things where they will blend new animation and old animation, either with like backgrounds, or sometimes they will have on like most of it is old, and then they do the cut, like the pilot cutaways, and that will be new, or the reverse, it's new footage with old pilot cutaways, which they do a lot in the third movie to save budget.
Yeah, so... And even on like purely new footage, if you look at the backgrounds, they are not done quite the same as you would with like all digital animation in 2005. They have made concerted efforts to make it blend. But
yeah.
With all of that, it's just jarring, and there's no way for it not to be jarring. Some of it, so movie 1, I actually think is the least jarring on this, because it tends to be the most, here's a concentrated sequence that's old TV footage, here's a new scene, here's a concentrated sequence, and then like the entire ending is new animation. Whereas like movie 2 and 3 have an awful lot of like in scenes, you will do a shot reverse shot where one character is old animation and one character is new animation, and they're just doing shot reverse shots on that because they've replaced someone's lines. And so I think it almost gets more jarring as it goes along. Like there's no like sustained stretch that's all new animation. It's a lot of back and forth. And however they scanned and remastered the original footage for like Zeta Gundam, it looks very good in some ways. I think like the color density and the grain field, I like a lot of that. It is overly noisy, though, and it is very compressed and artifacted, and I don't know if that's like the modern Blu-ray transfers. I kind of suspect...
No, that's the DVDs. It's the DVDs from that period, yeah.
Yeah. Well, were they just using DVD footage, or had they like gone back to the 35mm elements? I'm not sure.
I think they just used DVD footage based on interviews I read. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is not as if they did like a fresh 2K film scan and put that into the computer and cleaned it up and tried to make it match. Like, I have some problems with the modern HD version of Zeta Gundam. It's way too DNR'd and they've taken too much grain out. But it's undeniable that if you used like a modern remastering process, you could make this all blend much, much better than they did here.
Yes, but at the end of the day, like the effect it has, especially when you are cutting between them, it is like... It is. There are a few things you could do to like more like kick you out of like the flow of the movie than doing this. Like it is the thing where like it sucks because like overall, you know, for a 1980s TV anime, Zeta Gundam looks fucking great, and like proof of that is how good all the stuff. Like they leave big sections of some of the most important stuff in movie 3, just what the old animation is, because it wouldn't even look better if they redid it, because of like directorial choices are so strong in that third movie, which we'll talk about in terms of like the ending of Zeta Gundam just fucking rules. So why change it? Why did they change some of it? But you know, when you have this thing where you get used to the way that like the really high number of frames and things you get in the new animation, and then you cut to some of the stuff that is like the weakest looking stuff from Zeta Gundam, because a lot of the stuff for the first two movies in particular they keep is like, here's like two people standing in a room talking, because let's just have like these two people standing in the room talking. It's like, and that's like the cheapest looking shit, because that's where in the original it's like a still image with like one dude's like, you know, mouth cut out, that they're basically just animating only the frames on the mouth because it's a TV anime, it needs to be cheap. And when you're cutting between that stuff, like it's almost hilarious sometimes just how jarring the jump is, because it's so distracting. And especially because it is also, you know, it is a zoomed in basically version of Zeta Gundam, because it has to be cropped. Like it is not just a thing where they just went in, let's just cut off the tops and bottoms and move on. Like they intelligently cropped for the image, right? But at the end of the day, it's still sort of like some stuff just looks kind of weirdly blurry because it's not supposed to be like looked at this aspect ratio and like focused in on these elements so tightly. And so it makes like a lot of the stuff from the original show look really rough. And so when you just go from these long stretches of new animation and then you cut to the original Zeta Gundam TV footage, it's like, it looks like it's a joke or something. Like it's so ridiculous how far the change is. It would be like if you were watching King Kong and someone had edited together a version of King Kong that is cutting between the original movie and the Peter Jackson movie. It's just like, it would just be utterly bizarre. You wouldn't know how to process those cuts, right? Because in one sequence, it's this very fluid, like CG full gorilla man with like motion capture and all that, and the other it's a toy that is, you know, stop motion capture, and like both of the visual styles have their charm, and I like the way the original movie looks more, but in the same way that I kind of like the way that Zeta looks more aesthetically than the new animation, even if I recognize the new animation is technically way more advanced and way more expensive, it's still like juxtaposing the two just is so bizarre, and when you can't get into the flow of the movie sometimes because the plot's moving so fast. A further barrier that I had definitely with the first two movies was just like that effect of like, I just can't absorb myself in like the fiction of what's being told, because I'm so consciously aware that I'm viewing things, and I'm aware that right now I'm looking at something that was animated in 1985, and now I'm looking at something that's animated in 2005. And that just like kills part of like the audience experience of it to me.
So, like, what you're saying is it disallows you to just do the basic, like, suspension of disbelief or immersion or whatever that is of, I'm watching animation, I know Camille Bidon is something someone drew on a piece of paper, but I don't think about that while I'm watching. You kind of have to think about it if in one shot Camille was drawn in 1985 and looks like it, and then in the next shot he was drawn, like, and then scanned into a computer and digitally colored in 2005, and it just looks completely different.
Yeah, in the exact same way that if you did that with King Kong, while I'm watching either of those movies, I just believe the character.
Yeah.
I don't think about the fact that this is a toy or this is like a digital recreation, because they did such good character work in both those movies. But if you juxtapose it, you're so consciously aware of what is happening in the production technical side of it that it's not allowing you to just absorb the narrative, and it just gets in its own way. And it's unfortunate because there's no kind of way around it. Like, they couldn't have, like you really could not have edited that TV show into 3 90-minute movies if you're not making significant enough changes that you would have to either like really dramatically rewrite whole scenes of dialogue and just reuse footage but give them totally new dialogue to like pave over plot inconsistencies and stuff, or you redo a lot of the animation. And so it's one of those things where I don't know what you do about it given like the restrictions of what they have. But it is supremely distracting, and I think it is why I found a lot of the viewing experience of the first two movies very dull, was partially that. Like, I just couldn't get absorbed into the experience of watching the movie because I was conscious of like technical decisions being made basically at all times.
And it's funny because I obviously don't disagree with anything you're saying, because it is just a fact that it is weird and distracting, right? Like, it would be hard. Like, I could show this to my mom, who's never watched an anime all the way through, and she would be like, what's going on with the animation, right? You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But, like, I wasn't that alienated by it. In fact, actually, I think the first movie was by far the least distracting for me on that, because the first movie has the least new animation, and it tends to be concentrated more in sequences. The thing that started bothering me in the second and third movie is there's just no systematic way they deploy new animation. It is just purely on a shot-by-shot basis. Does this shot need it for whatever reason? And there are some sustained sequences, but like, you know, the majority of the third movie is built on the backbone of old animation because they've cut a lot, but they haven't like radically reoriented the plot. And so it's a lot of stuff where, I think the best example of this in the whole trilogy is the famous scene where Char has his "I have never betrayed anyone in my life" hum-on scene. Mm-hmm. And in that, it's mostly old animation, and then for the line where Char says his thing, it cuts to Char, and he looks different because now it's 2005, and then it cuts back to old Haman. And so it's just this pure, like, one insert because they wanted to change the line, and we'll talk about how they changed that line because I think it's kind of fascinating. But they wanted to change that line, so it's just this one shot they have to do it with. And that's what I mean by it's not systematic. Like, the systematic way to do that is you would reanimate that whole scene. But they're not. They're doing it on a shot-by-shot basis. And so that's where it gets distracting to me. And frankly, even more of that starts popping up later. There's a lot of it in the second movie because the second movie has to make a lot of like changes to kind of smooth over some of the transitions. You know, like the first movie, the climax is very easy to get into because they've almost entirely reanimated the last like 10 minutes of that movie. So yeah, it's tough. I still felt very immersed in these movies, and I don't know if I can exactly tell you why. I definitely noticed the changes while they were happening. I think maybe it's because I got used to it or whatever, but like I was still, and maybe it's just because like the force of the storytelling and the speed at which it happens, and I do think the audio mix is very good. I was listening to these with my nice headphones, and like you get Shigeaki Saigusa's utterly incredible score for Zeta Gundam that has been expanded in some incredible ways too, and you have all the new voice acting and sound effects, and like it works on the audio level, so that helps kind of smooth things over. But yeah, I didn't feel super distracted, but it did make me think of another example. I've been trying to think of like what I would compare this to for people maybe who are listening to this who haven't watched these movies. What it reminded me of was Dragon Ball Kai. That's the only other thing I can think of like this. And Dragon Ball Kai distracted me even more, and I'll tell you why. But if you don't know, Dragon Ball Kai is the show they did in 2009 that re-edited Dragon Ball Z to cut out all or most of, or what they could of, the filler. The basis of Dragon Ball Kai was all the old Dragon Ball Z footage, basically from the Dragon Box remasters, then upscaled to HD. And actually, the remastered footage in Dragon Ball Kai looks very nice. But then sometimes because they wanted to like redo a line or fix something or redo a scene, they would have these reanimated elements. And it was usually the cell layer, the character animation that would be reanimated on top of old animation. Sometimes it made sense, like Vegeta, when you first meet him in Dragon Ball Z, has weird coloring that he never has again. So they reanimate him to have his normal, like, series canon coloring. And that is like, okay, I get that. And sometimes, like, this became a whole thing in the fandom during the time, is that they were frequently reanimating things and we had absolutely no idea why, because it would usually just be they would be tracing on top of the old animation, but with, like, very thick digital lines and bad digital coloring, and so it would be extremely jarring. On some level, Dragon Ball Kai is less jarring because it was all done in, like, 2009 and 10, and so, like, the original source footage looked a lot better with the the tools they were using. But it was also just this thing that it would just come out of nowhere. And that's what I mean by like that lack of like systemic like approach to the reanimation when it's done on such a shot-by-shot basis. Those individual shots could look very good, but when you put it all together, then it just becomes like very jarring, as you're explaining, Sean.
It is. Yeah, it definitely severely impacted the way I enjoyed the movies. I think the main reason it didn't, like, because I definitely agree that I think the third one is the one that uses it the most haphazardly, but at the same time, I think, like, the third one has, like, the most clear, like, spine to what it's doing as a plot, because it's just like, let's cut out the Dakar stuff, let's cut out the Rosamia stuff, and that leaves about 90 minutes of Zeta Gundam to do, and so, like, it didn't hurt me that much there, because it's just like, you know, I'll just watch the ending of Zeta Gundam again if that's just what this is. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that there's so in the original Gundam movies, the original trilogy, there's a lot of new animation there. You obviously don't notice there's no shift quality to it because it's all done on 35 millimeter. It's done in the same animation style, all of that. So it all flows very well. But part of that too is that in those movies, they're doing reanimation much less to do transitions between episodes than just to clean up animation or improve sequences or add detail. And so there's a real like artistic quality to it where that third movie, like, it's basically just presenting the final 2 episodes in full, but it's reanimated most of them because they have the time and money to do it, and it looks sick as shit. This movie, like, or these 3 movies, like, most of the new animation is, like, purely functional. Like, it's there to, like, clean up a scene or redo a line. It's pretty rare. Like, I would say the ending of the first movie is the only major sequence I would point to that's, like, that exists because they wanted to make something look cooler than they could have done in 1985. There are new scenes, and some of those new scenes are very good, but most of the new scenes are new scenes that could have existed in 1985. They just didn't. And so they're having to do them with new animation, whereas, like, you know, in the original Gundam movies, when you have new animation, it's stuff that, like, they just couldn't have pulled off on a TV budget in 1979, so now they're doing it in 1982. And that's another, like, I guess, complaint I have with the new animation, is it's so functional, it's not as exciting.
Oh yeah, and I mean, part of that stuff with the original movies also is, like, the animation has varying level of qualities between shots no matter what. Like, and that is, like, apparent in these movies because, like I said, like, you have some of that action stuff from the original Zeta Gundam at the end of the series. Like, the last 2 episodes of Zeta Gundam are some of, like, the coolest looking, most well-animated TV anime episodes I've ever seen. Some of that is just, like, animation prowess. A lot of that is also just, like, directorial choices they make. So it's like, but you will always have, in particularly Japanese animation, very varying levels of quality, like numbers of frames of animation, things like that between cuts or shots. And so as long as it's the same general aesthetic and style, because with the original movies, those were made 2 years after the like 1 to 2 years after the TV show came out. It's like, yeah, this is obviously a way better looking shot of, like, the G fighter taking off from the white base than you would have gotten in the original TV show, but it is aesthetically in line with the rest of the animation you're seeing, whereas here there's just no choice. You can't make it look like the 80s for, like, a million different reasons. It wouldn't have been possible. So it's like they, you know, I think it was right to just, like, you know, clean it up and, like, blend it as much as you can with, like, the backgrounds and grain and all that kind of stuff. But you know, there's just nothing you could have done to fix this problem, I think, without just giving the movie a shit ton of budget.
Yeah, so which I would always support. Give Yoshiyuki Tomino money to make what he wants to make. That's what I say. But, all right, so we talked about the animation here. For movie 1, so we talked about that the beginning is very rushed. But do you agree with me in general that, like, the second half of that movie, like, works pretty well in like, a propulsive way because of the kind of push towards Jaburo? It worked for me.
I would say I think the very ending, I think all the stuff that they reanimated, like that section, works great. I think I'm very mixed on the Jaburo thing. I think it was smart to give that objective, and you're right that it's like they insert lines earlier and they create some lines near the beginning of the movie that did not exist in the TV show to, like, create this, like, direction of we're going to Jaburo. I think for me the main problem with it is that there's very little, like, connection to Camille in there, and so I think it's, like, structurally it makes a lot of sense, and I think with what they have, it's a smart choice. At the same time, I found myself very bored by most of the action stuff in Jaburo because like the Camille's main connection and the main emotional thread there that ties Camille specifically there are two things. It's his rivalry with Jared, and it's his desire to see Rekkoa again because she's become his surrogate mother figure. Both those things are present in the movie, but they're so heavily diluted, right? Yeah. So it's like you have some of that stuff with Jared, but like so much of it, like his relationship, Jared's relationship with I can never remember with all the names for all of his like random lovers that get killed by Camille. I think it's Lila is the first one. Like you have those moments and Lila's in there and she gets killed, but she's in it for like 10 minutes rather than that being a multiple episode thing of you seeing her relationship with Jared build up, Camille's like antagonism toward Jared build up. Similarly, you have a series of episodes that like build up Camille's relationship with Rekkoa and him kind of throwing himself at Rekkoa kind of as the surrogate mother figure. In the movie, they just have to like lean as hard as they can into that one fully reanimated scene in the middle that's all dialogue after Camille's mother is killed, where she's like he's like clinging onto her, and they just like lean very hard there to give you enough of that as you can. But I still don't think it's like particularly effective, especially because they then have to cut out all the stuff that you see Rekkoa land on Earth. You see her meet Kai. You see her get captured. All of that is set up in the TV show. And in the movie, all that's cut out. And all of a sudden, it just cuts to Rekkoa and she's in jail. And then Camille gets like a psychic impression of her. So it's like, I think the overall structural choices are sound, but so much has to be cut out in order to fit things into the time limit they have, that I think a lot of the actual like emotional thrust, and this is like going to be my same complaint with a lot of the second movie, a lot of the actual emotional like character-based thrust gets eliminated, and so the action scenes become action scenes and they don't become like narrative moments for me, I guess.
Yeah, so I agree with most of that. One thing I'd say on Rekkoa is I agree with it, like the her and Camille's relationship. I was even honestly like struggling to remember exactly how it went in the show because it is so cut down here and vestigial. But I actually didn't mind her where they made choices in like, because they like very clearly signpost she's going to Jaburo ahead of us. She's going there. Hey, we haven't heard from her in a while. Like they add these in, and then you cut to her in jail. And I actually thought that was a pretty savvy choice of scene because there just happens to be this scene in the show where she's in jail with Kai, and like they verbally like recap what happened to themselves, and they basically are able to use that. And I felt like as a movie viewer I was like totally fine on, because even like when Camille comes in and meets Kai, she like runs through like, this is Kai and here's who he is and here's his rap sheet, so it like worked for me fine on that level. I always would like more Kai because he's awesome. It's Toshio Furukawa, but that worked for me fine. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think this is actually one area where like the sheer speed of the movie worked in its favor for me, in that it's so unrelenting. I totally see where you have your reaction of just kind of being bored by it. I was pretty riveted by it because like Zeta has just such a singular style to its action, and it is so much of it, even in its kind of vestigial form here, is so virtuoso, and I just was kind of like locked in with it. And I think there's this quality where Camille, and this is kind of true for him in this stretch of the show too, is just swept up in these giant events, you know? And the second movie really is, and that part of the series is really where he starts to make choices about those giant events. And so this first movie is kind of, you're along for the ride with Camille after he makes those initial choices, and I just kind of felt swept up along for that ride, and I get to the end of the movie and the credits start to roll and I realize I'm finally taking a breath. I found it like very riveting and exciting, just almost like as an action movie, even if a lot of that action has been drained of some of its character and emotional context, which you're not wrong about, I agree. But yeah, this is just going to come down to, does it work for you or not? I'm not going to say it worked for me in the sense of this is better than the show. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying like in its own way it worked for me.
Yeah, I think for me specifically what it is I think like there's just not that much drama happening in, like, the attack on Jaburo feels like a very plot moment thing that has to happen, unless this thing that is dramatically motivated, in the sense of, I think one of the reasons why just cutting to Rekkoa being in the jail with Kai doesn't work for me is because part of the tension of that sequence is that, you know, as the audience, Rekkoa is in there. Nobody else knows that she is trapped in Jaburo. Yeah. Camille doesn't know, but the audience knows, right? It's the Hitchcock, the bomb under the table thing, right? You show the bomb under the table before the discussion, so that way the audience knows there is like a threat here, rather than if you just have a bunch of people talking and then it explodes, there's no tension to what has occurred. I think that's exactly my problem with what happens here with Jaburo, is they only introduce Rekkoa being an element in the scene once it becomes directly relevant, and as soon as she's introduced, then Camille learns that she's there and he goes to rescue her, rather than that whole sequence, in the TV show that the Titans are planning to blow up Jaburo. You know that Rekka was there, and Camille doesn't yet. So the tension is, will he find that out? Will he be able to rescue her before the nukes blow? All that stuff has a much clearer tension structure to it in the TV version, whereas in the movie version, it's like those things happen because they need to happen, right? It's the kind of thing that if you were to totally reanimate it, I feel like you wouldn't do any of that way, because it wouldn't make sense to. It feels like one of the things that happens in the movie because they're locked into that structure. They're locked into her having to have been captured and be in there with Kai, because you need to have Rekka there, and that's just the situation she was in the TV show, even if you can't have done all the proper setup to make it work.
That's totally fair. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It's a good point. Inevitable sacrifices were made.
Again, this is not and they fucked up because they did this. It is I don't know how you would have done this, but they, I think them making the smart choices around using Jaburo as the focal point for the climax and setting that up earlier, that was a smart choice. And I think it is what allows for a viewer like you that doesn't have the problems with it I have to get swept up in it and enjoy it, because it does have a focus. And that's smart, because I don't think it would never have occurred to me to make that the focus of the first movie in a Zeta Gundam trilogy. But it is the smart choice. It's just unfortunate that it ends up getting, for me, caught up in things that you have to do a lot of plot-based stuff because you're kind of caged in by it, rather than being able to sort of fully take advantage of that really smart structural choice they made.
Yeah. But then you do have the ending. So Amuro, it's kind of funny. Most of Amuro's scenes are actually in here. They're in very truncated form, but they do hit all of the basic beats of the Amuro story. If we meet him at his compound, who I did do a tweet on this. I had never realized Amuro is in this black suit while he's at that compound that looks exactly like the costuming of Daisuke Jigen, who is the character in Lupin the Third. And I did a tweet comparing the two, and it is fucking hilarious, because Amuro is slightly off model in some of those shots, and his legs are way too tall and long, and that's what makes him. And he's in the Daisuke Jigen hands in the pocket, slightly stooped over position. If you just put a cigarette in his mouth and a black bowler on, it would be perfect. Beside the point. That's there in the original animation. It made me laugh. So you have that. You have Kika, Katz, and Let's there. You have Fraubo, all of that. It obviously does not hit with the same impact, because there's something about the just sheer sadness of those scenes in the TV shows that I think is kind of a durational thing that you just inevitably lose here. But they do hit all those, and then at the end of the movie, you have Amuro and Katz come in to save the day in a mostly reanimated scene that is very, very well animated.
Yeah, no, yeah. All that stuff I really like. I think there are some things they do, choices they make, and kind of, I feel like some of the dialogue in the Amuro scenes with Fraubo is slightly sharper than it is in the TV show. They do, I think some of that is because they have to convey more in a compressed time. But I think a lot of the dialogue is the same or very similar, but there are just some slight tweaks they make, particularly to how Amuro and Fraubo talking to each other, that is just they kind of sharpen up that dialogue slightly, and I think that works really well. And then it just, if you're gonna pick a moment from this sequence of the TV show to give a bunch of good anime budget to, it is the moment where fucking Amuro flies this giant cargo plane into this really mobile suit, because Amuro's fucking cool. And it's that whole sequence and all the stuff with Char, and just that is one of those just great, to me, very iconic scenes in the original Zeta Gundam of Amuro and Char both saying each other's name without them consciously knowing that the other person is there, but they just instinctually detect it. So he's what are you doing, Amuro? It's get out of the way, Char. And then 30 seconds later, they're did I just fucking say Char? What the fuck? And then them getting out and looking at each other while they're falling. That moment looks gorgeous in the original show as well, but it is a very nice looking. This is one of the ones that I remember when I watched all the reanimated footage in a YouTube compilation several years ago, watching this scene and being fuck yeah, this looks fucking great. This scene rules. This is a very good looking version of this scene. It is very cool.
Yeah, and Camille's role in that of catching Amuro and Amuro being on the palm. It's just it's such a good climax and payoff for the movie too. Like, I just was so pumped coming out of this movie. Like, if I had been like a Japanese teenager seeing this, I feel like in 2005, I would have walked out of the theater, gone to the box office, bought another ticket, and gone back in, if for no other reason that scene at the end. It is just very, very well done. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. It's just a great kick to credits. It's a really good ending.
Yeah, and all the action stuff, the action scene with Rosamia and all that, like, it is mostly redone footage. It looks fucking fantastic. There's also a really good, I think, really smart, like, choice. This is, like, one of, like, the smartest scenes that they did a reanimation for to, like, kind of change some context around, is when Kai and Hayato are on the, their plane, whatever, I forget what it's called, the Carapace, like, big carrier plane. And Kai sort of pulls Hayato aside. He's like, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" That's it's basically replacing the he is a Char letter. He's like, "That guy's Char. What are you guys doing?" And then Camille overhears that. I think that's like just like it's a really good scene because one, I just like having Kai and Hayato like interact a little bit more directly than they kind of do in the TV show. And then also it is a smart way to get over the problem of Camille at this point in the TV show has basically figured out that Quattro is Char because it's really fucking obvious that Quattro is Char, right? But it's like a thing that he realizes in like subtly over the course of multiple episodes where there's no moment where he turns to the camera and goes, "I think that Quattro Baggina is actually Char." But there's lots of things he does that keys into the viewer that's like Camille's like figuring this out. And then but then in the plot, this is the moment basically where Camille, like, it is confirmed directly because he confronts Char at this point in the TV show about him being Char. But so getting that information and just like this one quick moment and just having him overhear this conversation and that being in this version of the story, a revelation that Camille has rather than it being a thing that he has slowly put together himself because you just haven't had the time to spend it on like seeing him put the pieces together. I think that it was just like a very smart decision that they made as like a movie version of this story.
Yeah, and that's what I mean when I say I love following just all the like very thought through decisions that they make in the editing or in the rewriting, and that's one of those. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, so that's movie one. Anything else to say about that?
I'm trying to, because there's a couple of other moments with reused animation. I think one of like the fun ones that I think is the most fun is when Rekoa is showing Emma the footage of the Gast colony that is footage from the episode in Zeta Gundam where they go and visit the gas colony. So instead of delivering that as like an episode story, she shows like this like on this camera, and I love it because it's all reanimated footage of Rekoa and Emma looking at a screen that has footage from 1985 Zeta Gundam, and in the footage is Emma, but you only see her from the back in a spacesuit, so they can just kind of get away with this is archival footage, but I think it is like a very good tongue-in-cheek, almost kind of like if you've seen the TV show, it's a very memorable episode. And so it's like having that there and delivering that this is the moment where Emma fully turns from the Titans, instead of that having it be a whole episode, which is great. It's one of the best episodes of Zeta.
Yeah. But
you can't do a whole 30-minute chunk of the movie on just that point for Emma. Instead of doing that, just use that footage, have this quick moment, and just deliver it that way. It's like very efficient, and I think is probably my favorite use of reanimated footage because of them blending it in that way that is very funny to me.
That's very, very smart. Yeah, I could not remember where the Gast colony episode goes, so I wasn't sure. So I'm glad you brought that up. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's footage from an episode of Zeta Gundam, but I didn't remember if like, does it happen in this stretch? Does it happen later? It does happen in this stretch. So yeah, that's good. That's great. And then did you say there was another one?
Yeah, I guess the other one, because there's that one big reanimated scene. I kind of touched on it with the Requiem stuff, but they have a very big scene in the middle of the movie that is all reanimated. That is just Char, Rekoa, Emma, and Camille sitting around and talking. That it's like, I think it's probably like the longest stretch of reanimated footage that is not used for an action scene in all three of these movies, where they just like really move through a lot of plot, because that's where they introduce Char, that's where they do a lot of Emma's character development, that's where they set up most of what Rekoa is as a character for all three of the movies. Like they just like, it is a very dense scene of dialogue of these three people talking around, and then it ends with a moment I love that they added in as this weird little touch, where as they're leaving the room, I forget who, I think it's Char gets like, Char, yeah, as they're leaving the room, Emma leaves, Char and Rekoa stop by the door, and that's when they have the conversation about that Rekoa's going to go down to Jaburo, and then Emma's like, what are you guys doing? And then Rekoa turns to her and says, oh, the lieutenant was just touching my butt, and then she leaves, and it's this very weird moment of like, what? And then just cuts.
I think, doesn't Ikeda have a line there about like it's he has some reaction that's very funny there. I felt.
Yeah, he's just like, huh?
Yeah.
He's just like, hey.
Yeah, it's great. And it's funny because it is combining multiple scenes from the original, because like the whole conversation about like there was a man named Shah Aznable and he did these things, and like that's in the original. I remember that very vividly. It's a really strong scene, and I think that scene, that dialogue does happen in a similar setting where they're all at the table together.
Yes.
But they're combining it with other things, and yeah, it's a notable dialogue scene. There's some other stuff, like there's a big scene with Basque Ohm and the Titans and stuff in, I think, film 2 or 3 that is a similar like giant dialogue scene. But yeah, this might be the most substantial of those. That's just completely new. Yeah. All right. The only other thing I want to note is that so all of these movies have theme songs by Gackt. Gackt, who is a very famous singer in Japan, actually still producing albums and touring to this day. I looked it up.
Star of hit video game Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, Gackt. He plays a major character in that game.
Oh, I did not know that. That's cool.
Mostly where I've been thinking about Gackt in the past year is in entirely connection to Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core.
I really like the 2 songs for this movie. So this movie kicks off with the song Metamorphize. Or Metamorphose. It's weird. And I like that song very much. I like the whole opening sequence because they give this like a proper big like opening credits sequence that you don't often get in anime, where like, well, okay, all anime has you know what I mean. I mean, like in an anime movie where it's like a movie opening where like you've got the stars listed and all of that and over this big song. It's really cool. And then at the end of the movie, you get this, what's the song at the end? I forget what it's called, but I like the song that plays over the ending. I only have it in Japanese. Kimi ga mate iru kara.
Yeah, because I'm waiting for you.
Yeah, it's a very good song. So I like the ones in the sequels as well, but the songs in the first movie I think are the best. And they're very good.
I adore what they do at the end of the credits of the first movie, where the logo for the second movie comes up and Four and Haman are like leaning on it. And it's like, that is... Like, and I was really bummed in the third movie that they didn't do, like, they did something slightly similar with the Zeta Gundam, but like I thought that it was such a slick move as the song is like fading out and the credits are ending, the logo for the next movie comes up, and here's like the 2 like really memorable characters that are going to show up. I thought that was like a really sick move.
Absolutely. All right, movie 2, Lovers. Which I like that it's Lovers, and then the next one is Love is the Pulse of the Stars. So 2 of the 3 of these have the word love in the title. And this one I think structurally is the oddest of the 3. It has almost the exact same problem as Mobile Suit Gundam 2 Soldiers of Sorrow, which is that it kind of feels like 2 movies. You know, Soldiers of Sorrow has the split around the middle where you have the what is it? Day.
Oh man, I should be able to run this off immediately off the top of my head. Odessa Day. That's it.
Odessa Day. You have Odessa Day, and like that like happens in the middle of the movie, and then you continue on to all the Dublin stuff that ends the movie.
No, all the Jaburo stuff. Dublin is Double Zeta.
Sorry, Jaburo. Anyway, so you have all the Jaburos. No, don't. They go. Don't they stop in Dublin?
Do go. Yeah, they do also go to Dublin in the original, and then they go to Jaburo, right? Because that's the end of that movie is in Jaburo, right?
Yeah. But you do have they have Kai's girlfriend.
Yes, they have
picks up
Kai's
in Dublin.
whole story. Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, but that kind of feels like in an ideal version, maybe there would have been 4 movies, and you would have split those into 2 separate because there's kind of a culmination in the middle, and then you have to keep going. This movie, I think, kind of has that too, where the first half is roughly like about 4 and Camille and like Camille's adventures on Earth with Amuro, and then at the midpoint he gets back into space, and then the second half is about that stuff and Camille kind of reintegrating with the crew and having kind of a new outlook, and you have a lot of expanded stuff with like the supporting cast, and then at the end you have the introduction of Haman Karn, which is a great ending, but it does kind of feel like 2 movies squished into one. I did like it. I think the through line that they chose is like very there in the title. They do kind of foreground a lot of the different couplings that sort of happen through this stretch of the show, and I think there's some good character work done throughout this movie. In some ways I think it's the weakest of the 3 just because I do think it's a little shapeless, but I still enjoyed it for all the reasons I said about the first one, and I think it has all the same limitations pretty much.
Yeah, because it definitely is. It kind of feels like broadly what they did is they kind of centered the first half of the movie around 4 in terms of like leading it as lovers, and then the second half of the movie around Sarah and her like relationship with Katz and Camille, And
Yeah.
and I think that's where the second half of the movie gets hurt, just because like a lot of that stuff in the TV show even is like, that's like some of like the weaker stuff. Like I think all the whole thing of that they do basically the entirety of the Armstrong Plaza, and Sarah has set the bomb up there and Camille meets her. Like that's a fine episode in Zeta Gundam, but it's like not something that like my mind jumps to as like this is like a really plot critical kind of moment. But kind of because of the way they've chosen to frame things, it gets forefronted in a way that I think like really hurts the back half of this movie when they have to go through that whole plot sequence, because it is not a good like building up to the climax of your movie kind of plot to have to go through.
No, I think I agree with that. And I think that the problem with the Sarah... I actually like the Sarah stuff a lot. But the Sarah stuff is a lot of build-up for payoff in the third movie.
Yeah.
And in the third movie, there's not really a lot of time to let that payoff, like, fully pay off. So I'm just not sure it, like, fully belongs in either film to the degree it does. I mean, you have to have Sarah there. You have to have Sarah there if you're keeping the finale where Camille is like meeting all the spirits and Sarah is the one in his way and Kat's like, it's really necessary if you're keeping that scene in. And I think you should keep that scene in because it's the key to Zeta Gundam. But like, yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of in a weird nether region because of where it's split between the two movies. But I do think this movie does some of the best like character work. It slows down a little bit more than either of the other two movies to just have scenes with Katz and with Emma and with some of the other figures in this movie. I think they do really good work with Emma and the captain of the other AUG ship.
Yeah,
Henkin. I think there's a lot of reanimated stuff there to like I think play up that relationship, and it's really sweet. There's a lot of stuff like there. I really like how Henkin comes across in this. Apoli Chewie also I think is he is pretty much just as foregrounded as he is on the show, which is to say he is the best background character, and he's just great. I always love him.
Yeah, I agree that definitely this movie, it makes some space for that stuff, and I do think like it's one of those elements where by the fact you've cut so much else out, I think like the Emma Henkin relationship plays a lot stronger in the movies than it does in the TV show, where it's mostly like kind of a gag for most of the TV show, and then it gets a little bit more serious once you get into the ending, because then obviously Henkin goes and sacrifices his whole ship to save her, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like it does
too.
Yes, yeah, but it does foreground that by putting it in the movie in a way that I think works pretty well. One thing that's interesting with this movie, because it kind of comes up more here, is there's an interesting stuff for kind of like around the voice cast of these movies, where a lot of the cast is the same from the TV show, but there are quite a few roles that were recast, most notably for and Sarah. And I think for both those roles, to their detriment. So you've got a couple of the recastings that we didn't talk about, but were in the first movie. So Fa is recast. She's now voiced by Satomi Arai. The main reason why Fa has a new voice actress is because the original voice actress had retired at this point. So it's like you had no choice. You had to recast her. I think the recasting worked really well for Fa. I think like that, and she now is like this voice in all the games and stuff like that. And she does a very
She's
good
really
job.
good. I definitely noticed that wasn't Fa, but I had no problem with it. She was very good, and she played off of Camille great, which is what that character needs to do. So worked fine.
Yeah. Let's see. Hayato also got recast. I'm not entirely sure why Hayato got recast, but it's Hiyama that plays him, so it's the same voice actor that is the main character in 08th MS Team. And that one villain in Gundam Seed, so he's now Hayato. He does a good job. Again, I tried to look around why the voice actor's still alive. I think he's still working. It looks like so.
That's weird. I mean, Hayato, I guess he's not in any other 2000s Gundam stuff that we would like, other than games and stuff. So yeah, I actually didn't notice with Hayato. He has so few lines. I probably just didn't pay attention.
I'm pretty sure Rosamia is also recast, although it's Asukawa Yu is who they recast her as, who's like a great voice actress. So it's like I think that one, and Rosamia, most of her stuff is cut out of the movies, so that one works fine. The most notable ones, and these were like fairly controversial at the time in Japan, is that 4 was recast. Let me see if I'll bring up the voice actress, because I have lost my page on this web browser. So 4, no, not in the Italian cast. 4 was recast with the voice actress Yukana, who is like a pretty good voice actress. She's in Full Metal Panic. I think she's in Code Geass. But so that role got recast, even though the original voice actress, like still like works. Like she's in a lot of stuff. Saiko Shimazu is the original voice actress for 4. And then also Sarah got recast, and her original voice actress also still works in a lot of stuff. But she was recast in movie 2 with an actress, Chizuru Ikewaki. And then the third movie, they recast it again with a third actress, Kaori Shimamura. And both of those neither of them are really voice actors. They're more TV actors. And I think for me, I think you can kind of tell. And for a lot of those recastings, like, I think the performance is good, but I do think it's like a fairly different feeling character to me. Partially because it's stuff that's cut down, but also I think the performance feels less like 4 is this person who is like completely like fractured at her core, right? That her like memory, her identity, her personality has been like manufactured and fucked with for her entire life, which is what like the character feels like in the TV show. Here, I think you get a way less of that comes across. And then Sarah feels like she's basically the same character. I just think the performance is not as good in either of the movies as what the TV version was.
Yeah, something definitely sounded... I did not go in and check if they had been recast. Something sounded off about both of them. 4 was the one I noticed most while watching these movies, of just like... And I honestly, off the top of my head, having only seen Zeta Gundam once, it wasn't like I could tell you that she had been recast as much as like just something felt very different. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about. There is less of that like she is more strong-willed and put together here. And on one level, I do see that as a conscious choice because of how they've redone her arc. They don't have the second half of it. They have her die in action here. It's truncated. I think in some ways it works. In some ways it does make her feel like a less special character, though. So, yeah. Sorry.
Well, just to cover like some of like the controversy of that, because for both of those roles being recast, like, you know, particularly in Japan, there's like, you know, the culture around voice actors and voice acting in terms of like fans is way more intense than it is in the West. So there was some controversy, and there's like lots of rumors about why the voice casting happened. I think for me, what it feels like probably happened is when you look at the number of roles that were voice cast, or recast, the vast majority of them are female characters, and it feels like this like vaguely sexist thing of you want to have younger voice actresses to play your young characters, and then it's like it's fine if like, you know, someone who's like 40 plays a teenager if they're a dude, but if it's a woman, it's like you can't buy it. That's kind of what it feels like. Probably some of the casting choices were. There are like lots of contradictory like quotes from Tomino and the sound director, kind of trying to like kind of point the finger at different people about like why this ended up happening. Because basically the voice actresses for 4 and Sarah, all they have said publicly is that like they were never offered a position. And so it feels like, my guess is probably just like the choice was made to go with younger voice actresses because it's like that's just kind of the culture, and it's sort of fucked up.
That's very fucked up. Yeah. Because Toru Furia is still playing Amuro, and Amuro
and he still does like lines for the games of like 14-year-old Amuro, right? And he kicks ass at it, you know, because he's a great voice actor. But like all these actors are great voice actors. They could still play their character even if they're older.
Of course. Masuko Nozawa still voices Kid Goku when she has to. And Goten and all of this stuff. And no one bats an eye because she's amazing and perfect. But that's actually an interesting point. But Masuko Nozawa is voicing young boys. If she was voicing young girls, would those roles be taken away? That's actually an interesting thing to think about. That's a weird form of sexism going on. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway... what did you think about the 4 stuff in this movie? It's, you know, focused on sort of her initial appearance. It does get, like, it is heavily focused. It's not like they, like, cut this within an inch of its life. There is an extended section of the film on this. I found it effective, but I do think, like, I was so waiting for her second appearance, it didn't even fully register that she got shot in the head for me. Where I'm like, I wonder how she'll recover from that bullet wound. And then it was near the end of the movie, I'm like, oh, they just killed her. Oh, they just killed her. Oh, okay. And I wonder if I watched it again, if I would think like more positively of it, less positively. I don't know. They obviously made the decision to not do the second half of Ford's story, which I understand, but I don't know. It feels a little vestigial.
Yeah, I mean, the vestigial is probably how I would describe it as well. Like, I think I mean, so I went in knowing, like, I already knew that Forever 4, the episode that is, like, one of, if not, like, maybe the best individual episode of Zeta Gundam, which is where she comes back, and it's where she dies and all that stuff, and Amuro comes back, and all that. I knew that sequence was cut out, because all the Dakar stuff and all that is cut out, and that, like, leads into the Dakar stuff. So yeah, so I knew going in that, like, she dies, like, properly at the end of the movie, or not at the end, but like the end of her story stuff in the movie. Also because I had seen that sequence because it's all reanimated. But yeah, I do think it's the section where I think you feel probably the most how much is, like, sort of hurt just by, like, having to cut stuff out, mostly because the Force stuff is so iconic. It's like, so that's just one of the most memorable stretches of the original TV show, that, like, you can't help but feel how much is lost. And it's not just for, I feel like even more dramatically what is lost is Camille's relationship with Amuro is, like, so cut down that it feels like it's barely even there. And it's frustrating because it does feel like it's a really important piece of Zeta Gundam, is this, like, really fascinating, like, this really weird, messed up mentor-mentee relationship that Amuro and Camille has, where Amuro does not want to be a mentor, and he does not see Camille as, like, a pupil or something like that. Camille doesn't want Amuro to be a mentor, and yet can't help but, like, want him to be a mentor at the same time, right? And it's like, there's neither of them want to occupy these roles. Both of them are, like, compelled to do so. And it's, like, where Amuro gets, like, a lot of interesting character growth, and Camille gets a lot of interesting character growth. But then in the TV show, all of that stuff is paid off in the episode Forever 4, where 4 is killed ultimately in the TV show. So it's like, it makes sense to, like, cut a lot of that down and stuff like that, but it does, I think, hurt as a fan of the TV show to, like, see how much that stuff gets cut out, because it does feel like 4's relationship with Camille, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but it is cut down so much by having them having effectively spent one day together, rather than it being something that takes place over the course of, like, a larger span of time because it's a TV show. It just, like, naturally is going to, like, hurt the impact of that relationship and makes it something that's a much smaller part of Camille's character than it is in the TV show.
Yeah, and I think I'll tell you where I felt this for me is, first off, Nobuo Tobita, who plays Camille, is phenomenal in these movies.
Yeah.
It is such a good performance. He still is able to sound youthful, but I also think, I haven't seen Zeta in a while. The like extra 20 years of maturity he has as a voice actor, I really hear in these movies. Like, he is just really good. There's a lot of weight behind his line readings. It's just a great performance. And there's the iconic scene in the movie, and it's in this TV show too, where he jumps into, like, 4's cockpit, and he is, like, at her legs, and he confesses all this stuff about his, like, parents and his past, and is just unburdening himself. And he has this really mean thing he says about Fa that just, like, comes off the tip of his tongue, and she says this line that is etched in my memory and I will never forget, which is, "Do you still hate your name, Camille Bidan?" And he says, "No, I don't anymore." And I think it's one of the best moments in all of Gundam. And Tobita fucking knocks that scene out of the park in this movie. It is an amazing performance. And yet it feels a little hollow because the setup, "I hate my name," and the payoff, "Do you still hate your name?" are, like, 10 minutes apart in this movie. And there's just something about that that's, like, it's just inevitable. It's like, that's more than any plot inconsistencies is the reason why you have to watch the TV series, not the movies, right? Like, plot is one thing, but, like, it is the impact of seminal moments like that, like, are fun to watch in movie form as a supplement, but there is just no replacement for the real thing. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because I mean, at its core, the Hong Kong stuff should be its own movie. Like that, yes. Like the end of that whole sequence, like that's like a climax of a movie. You know, like it's just so huge. And one of the big things that's cut out, and it's one of the places where you feel like reusing elements of the original script to create what feels like weird inconsistencies or something. A very clear example of that is a major part of the thrust in Camille and 4's relationship is that 4 has lost her memories, right? And she's told that her memories have been taken from her by the lab or whatever, the cyber new types. Yeah. And so her motivation is she wants to find out who she is. She wants to regain her memories. That is like fundamentally why she's doing this, like that, and also she's like just this, been broken as a person because of the experiments that have been conducted on her, and so she has like these wild manic kind of mood swings where she is either like deadly serious and threatening, and then in the next moment she's running around like the fence with her like fingers like passing through the rings of the fence, which they do that scene in this movie, and like I think it plays very false because her character hasn't been set up that way to have like that like light fairy manic pixie dream girl kind of quality to her as she has in the TV show. But then the other thing that they do though is that Camille reaches out to her specifically saying, but we can make new memories. And then she later leaves, and that's when the Psycho Gundam comes back. And then she has a line referencing that where she basically says, is like, I want my own memories. I want my old memories. Like, new memories aren't enough for me. Like, something along those lines. They have that dialogue in there in the movie, but the setup for it's totally cut out because she and Camille never have the talk about we can make new memories together. That setup's not there. So when she goes crazy and flips out in the Psycho Gundam, like part of the setup of their character relationship just has not been done because that whole sequence got cut. So that's where like a lot of the shape of the 4 relationship is there, but a lot of like the heart of what makes it work in the TV show has just been totally cut.
I could swear there is the line about him saying we can make new memories together. I thought that was in there. Maybe I'm
so that I think he has a similar line that is in the scene where he's in her cockpit, but there's a moment before that in the TV show that sets up that dynamic of him. He like makes that offer to her, and then she like sort of violently rejects it, which is what sort of propels her into the Psycho Gundam.
But I completely agree with your point about like really Hong Kong should be its own movie, because that's what I mean when I say this feels like 2 movies. Like, if you chose to end 4's story here, but also gave it like this is a big 90-minute movie, her dying and as Camille is being launched back into space to rejoin with the Argama would be a killer ending to a movie.
Yeah,
and it's a killer scene here. But yeah, it's 40 minutes. It's not a movie. But yeah, and I think we already talked a lot about the second half. The ending of our queen Haman Karn coming and saving the day and being a fucking queen. Very good ending. This is very good, and I love. There's a specific moment they ended on where they have Camille kind of get up in his cockpit and take off his helmet and look, and it's like he says, "These damn adults, they can't figure this out," or something like he's just frustrated, and he's like also you see how far Camille has come in like asserting himself and starting to see the contours of this conflict and its problems. Very savvy ending, I think.
Yes. And then, but the main thing is that Haman Karn shows up. She looks very good in all the new animation. That is one that they didn't recast, because if you tried to recast Haman Karn, you get fucking stabbed. That's what would happen, is that we would come out of the woodwork and say no. So that whole... I think that was because I was watching that movie, like, not remembering... like where it was supposed to end, and so for a long part of that second half I'm like, where did they stop this? Like, what happens at the end of this movie? And it's like, then the fucking Gaza Seas pop up. I'm like, oh fuck, that's right, fucking Haman Karn is here. This is a very smart place to end this movie.
It is very smart. I do think they could, so they have a little bit of foregrounding of that where the Argama is headed in this movie is to rendezvous with these Axis Xeon forces. And I thought they should have played that up a little more, kind of like they do with the Jaburo stuff in the first movie, to just point us towards, like, that's our climax is over here. And I do think the Sarah stuff in the Armstrong port kind of derails that a little bit, because that is an interesting direction of, like, something's going on over in Axis. And then, like, they have this big fight with Paptimus to end the movie, and then all of a sudden Queen Haman Karn comes in and saves the day, but also dooms them all. And I think, like, that could have been focused in on better. But the overall shape is good.
Yeah. One thing that I do think is benefited by the movie version, condensing things, is I think, like, Paptimus as the main antagonist, like, comes forward much stronger in a way that I do really like in the TV version. On, like, a rewatch, I think the ways that Paptimus is set up is very, like, cool, and I think it works really well for the TV show when you see it a second time. But your first time watching the TV show, I remember us having this talk when we did the Zeta Gundam episode, is that when Shirako shows up in the scenes that they have in the first movie where he shows up for the first time, you don't, as a viewer, have context to, like, know that you should really be paying attention to this guy because he's going to be really important. And there's lots of interesting things they do with him in those scenes of the TV show, but because it's one new character amongst, like, a whole host of new antagonists that are constantly being introduced to every episode, he doesn't register as much. Whereas in the movies, he has a lot of like prominence in that big action stuff that he shows up in movie 1, and so then when he pops up in movie 2 again, and he's in a huge section of the second half of movie 2, he comes forward as like the primary antagonist, I think much stronger and much more kind of obviously.
I might say something even mildly controversial. I think the same is true of Haman in movie 3. I think movie 3, its big strength, transitioning to this third movie, is that it has Haman and it has Paptimus, and it is built around those two. And like, there's this core of these two fucking wild cards that you like, and like, then you have Ayug and these other, and even the Titans, frankly, both trying to figure out what the hell is their deal. And they just dominate, like, because most of Haman Karn's scenes are still, like, not every line, but, like, most of her stuff is still in here. She comes across really strongly. The vocal performance, as always, is fantastic. Paptimus, it's kind of the same thing. There are, more of his scenes are cut, but, like, overall, they really, because of the condensing, like, I think both of them just come through really strongly in that third movie as our, like, central sort of axis of enemies here. It's really good. I think that's the strength of the third movie, is having those two and building it around those two gives it just this really clear spine.
Yeah. So to transition to the third movie, like, I personally feel the third movie is like far and away the best of the three. Like, I think for me personally, it's not even close. Largely because the third movie has by far the easiest job of what to cut and what not to cut. So what it cuts is it cuts all the Dakar stuff. So, like, the section of the episodes that movie 3 has is episodes 33 to 50, which I think is the most, technically, episode count of all of the three movies. Because the first one's 1 to 14, the second one is 14 to 32, third one is 33 to 50. So it's about the same as what the second movie has to do. But what they cut is all of the Dakar stuff, and they cut all of the Rosamia stuff. And those are really, really clean, easy cuts to make. And in particular, the Rosamia stuff in the back half of Zeta is the worst part of the TV show. And in fact, the movie doing this, like, highlights for me, I think, why the Rosamia stuff exists in the first place in the TV show is entirely just to give Camille something to do while everything else is happening. So you have something to cut to with Camille, that he has an ongoing character arc while you're building up Shiroko, you're building up Haman, you're spending a lot more time with Char. And so, like, all that stuff with Rosamia and then also all the stuff with Rekua happens here. And so it gives this other thing to kind of cut to and have Camille be occupied while you're building up the other elements of the show. And you don't need that for the movie because all of it's just concentrated and focused. So they just cut all that stuff. I feel like they're really clean cuts, and it leaves this really clear core, as you were saying, of where you have this dynamic now of Shiroko sort of manipulating the Titans, and trying to sort of like gain primacy. Haman using her position to kind of manipulate all sides, and she like is making and breaking treaties left and right. And then the main thing that is hurt is Char. Like, his character arc gets mostly kind of shuffled to the side because he doesn't have his big revelation of the Dakar stuff where he kind of reclaims his identity. But instead you have Camille feeling like he becomes a more active participant in the like political struggles that are happening between those major figures.
It's, the way I feel about the Char stuff is it's sort of like the Lord of the Rings theatrical cuts versus the extended cuts, where one of the ways Peter Jackson and company in the theatrical cuts, they talk about this a bunch, is one of the ways they made edits was Frodo is the main character. So Frodo stuff has to stay prime. And so in the theatrical cuts, you get stuff like Faramir, in movie 2 is just way less developed. And I think that's a weakness of the theatrical cut, but I also like understand where that comes from because Faramir is not Frodo. But then you watch the extended cut and you get that, and I do think it's better overall, but I also understand why they made these cuts for theaters. I kind of understand that here. Char is Char. We love Char, obviously, and all of that stuff, like what the Dakar stuff is some of the best stuff in Zeta Gundam. It's just some of the best stuff in Gundam. I mean, it's phenomenal stuff. But Camille does have to be the main character, and it would be hard to edit that in movie form and properly contextualize Camille. So I have no problem with that at all as a choice. Like, I think it's the right choice to make for this. And I agree with everything you're saying, Sean. I have trouble, though, quite saying this is my favorite of the three movies because I think it does all these smart, savvy things, and then I think the ending and how they've changed it just fucks all of that. Because, like, building it around that axis of Paptimus and Haman doesn't really work when the ending is Paptimus is killed, and Haman, I guess, just gives up. Like, the kicker of Zeta Gundam is that Haman just fucking wins. And I feel like they try to change this into an ending where Ayug wins, and I don't buy it for a second, and I don't think I would buy it if I hadn't seen the show. Like, I just don't think it works with what they've given us. So that's where it kind of falls apart for me.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, but that's like 8 minutes of the movie. And like, and especially since I already knew that that's how it ended, like, it was very easy for me to get to the point where Camille fucking rams the fucking Zeta Gundam into Shiriko's chest, the like one of the great all-time villain deaths in the history of anything. And just be like, I had a great time watching this. I know that the ending, because I had already seen the next 8 minutes. I know the rest of this is a dumb change, but I'm able to be like, and then this is where the movie's over, because I remember what the TV show ending is, and it's perfect. So it's like, I really, we should just make an edit of this movie that just replaces the ending with just the TV show ending, and then it's like, there, done, perfect.
I thought you were going to say it's an edit where it like freeze frames on Shiroko where his face is like all distorted as he's getting stabbed, and then it just cuts to credits from that.
No, you want to give Camille his little moment at the end, and then it's just you know, then you just end. So I agree that like the ending decision is really dumb, but like the journey along the way, this just is to me the most these movies feel like Zeta Gundam. Like, it feels like it gets the tone, it gets the feeling, like it gets the like mushiness of Zeta in a way that the other two movies, that stuff ends up getting cut out, because like all like the human drama and like the tenseness of the story of Zeta feels like it gets kind of washed away by like the like really heightened plot pace that they have to go for. Whereas here, it is like, in many ways, like I do think this is like an improvement on elements that you have here in this section of the TV show, which this is the only time in any of these three movies that I think that happens. Whereas I think there are moments throughout, like if you go with the original Mobile Suit Gundam trilogy of movies, I think there are several sequences in those movies that do it better than the TV show.
It's through all three. There's ones where they do it worse too, but there's plenty in all three movies. You could list lots of examples.
Yeah, and I don't think movie 1 or 2 have anything that feels to me like it is a better version of that stuff. Like the ending of movie 1 has like, that's a cool different version of the scene where Char and Amuro see each other, but that scene is also like incredible in the original, and like I don't know if I would say the new version is better. Here, like I think pushing Haman and pushing Shiroko up to the front and kind of like pulling a lot of the other stuff aside and just getting that, what is like mostly what this movie is like about the last 8 episodes of Zeta, just like fucking shot into your goddamn heart, and that's it. Like with all the Rizumia stuff just cut out, and it fucking rules.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, Camille, I think, comes forward better. And yeah, I mean, that they kind of recast the main trio in this movie as Camille, Haman, and Poptimus, and then Char becomes kind of like the supporting character of those three, which is, they're much more equal in the TV show. But I also think Camille gets a little diluted down the home stretch because of that. So yeah, it's overall, I would still say the TV show is the better version, but but you're right. I mean, there are some absolute, like, very savvy things they do here that do feel like improvements, and it is the one that by far works on its own terms as a movie the most, because it's just, you start with Haman and you are off to the races. I think the only like super awkward cut, honestly, is going from them escaping Haman to then going back to Haman. It has to happen so fast because of its movie form that's a little whiplashy. But you still get the great, scenes of Shuichi Ikeda having to like voice a like repentant Char trying to get Haman on his side and all of that. It's very good, and just, I think, like, it's not that they've added Haman Karn stuff, but I think, she is not the most important character here in the show because it's mostly set up for her in Double Zeta. But like pulling all of her scenes out and putting them in one movie and like just getting this 90-minute injection of Haman Karn is really fucking great. It's awesome.
Yeah, I just enjoyed the viewing experience of this movie a lot. Yeah. And a lot of it is just because it's like, the fucking ending of Zeta Gundam is so unbelievably good. Like, yes. And not just like the ending, like the whole build up, the way that everything just sort of breaks to pieces in this sort of stalemate that the different factions are in, and it's just this messy fucking fucked up war where everyone just dies left and right. It's like, and like people betray the whatever side they're on, like people are manipulating, like all that stuff just comes across really well in the movie. And it just, it the ending of Zeta fucking rules, I guess.
I had the exact same reaction, Sean, and I think, they do most of the final 2 episodes, like, kind of like the original Gundam movies do. Like, most of that is in here, and it is so good. Like, I realized, because it's about halfway through the movie you enter the climax, and I realized where we were, and I'm like, oh my god, they're doing it. They're doing all of it, and it is so fucking great. Yeah, it is just such a triumphant achievement. And honestly, like, that home stretch until the epilogue has like the least new animation, because it's like, Zeta's perfect. Yeah. What do you do with it?
Yeah, you don't need it, because it's also, here is where I think, like, the original Zeta, those last 2 episodes, like, they're just like directorial choices they make where they just like go very extreme aesthetically in a way the show had not done. So you have like the scene where Camille and Haman have their like psychic face-off, and just everything just gets washed in this like red light, and they're like the black lines of the characters' faces and stuff just get incredibly exaggerated. And like, I had kind of forgotten just how stylized some of that stuff is. Or when Patmos gets killed and his character just completely distorts. And it's just something that like Zeta never is like that up to that point. Yeah. It never like pushes like the design off model for like aesthetic purposes. It's only because they didn't have budget and like, we're not going to redo this cut, let's just let it in there. That's the only reason anything would be off model in the original show. Here they're pushing things because everything has been pushed to this extreme limit of like human emotion, as like the boundaries of reality fucking fall apart because people are having these psychic visions and coming together and breaking apart in that way. So yeah, like there are really notable sequences in Zeta Gundam here that are like some of the most iconic scenes, like the theater scene, Haman and Camille facing off, Camille in Patmos's last battle, that they do almost no new animation for, just because you couldn't improve on it. So like, why spend the money doing the redoing that animation when it just is fucking perfect? You don't need to do anything. It would look worse in many ways because you couldn't convey, I think, the same aesthetic style with the modern animation as what Zeta Gundam did as a TV show in 1985.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. I also just want to, again, give a shout-out to the musical score. Like,
oh, God, yeah.
The Shigeki Saigusa score for Zeta, and then Double Zeta and Char's Counterattack, they are all phenomenal. It's a great era of Gundam music. And, like, the music in Zeta is such a flex because it is so big and cinematic and, like, sweeping. And it is just like, you take those tracks, and they didn't re-record them. You just put some of those verbatim tracks in this movie, and it fits perfectly because it's movie music. It's so good. And I think the new compositions he's done for this are also fantastic. But it's just, man, because they also hold off in the movie trilogy on using a couple of those key cues that are used a bunch of times in the show, but they hold off on letting them use where they were originally used in the closing episodes for those moments because, it's just too good to pass up,
Yeah, it's definitely a thing where, like, it being a movie, and by virtue of that, it's not like reusing the same tracks over and over again the way the TV show does. It makes the music feel so fresh, because it's just like it is one of the best ways, I think, to enjoy the Zeta Gundam soundtrack is to watch these movies, just because it like, you get this really great, action and all of that with the music, and you're not repeating the same like handful of battle themes because it is using the full like breadth of that soundtrack for 3 90-minute movies, rather than across a 50-episode TV show. You're going to hear like, oh yeah, this is like the battle theme we had 2 episodes ago, and then 3 episodes before that, and so on and so forth, where it kind of dilutes the like impact of hearing the music. Here it's just like, I was constantly being like, oh fuck yes, the music in Zeta Gundam, it fucking rules. It's so good. All this shit is so good. It's just the ending of Zeta Gundam fucking is great.
Great. Before we move on to the ending of the movies, I did want to shout out just one other like actor thing. I think Bin Shimada as Paptimus, I think he's even better in the movies. He is so good, and like he's another one who was like a young actor, kind of new in '85, and by 2005, he carries more weight into the booth. And Paptimus, like to the point where I was checking, like, was this recast? Like, I don't remember Paptimus like striking me vocally this much, but he was like, when he's on screen, you're paying attention. It's a really good performance.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I really love all the work he does as Shiroko in the original show, but yeah, it definitely a combination of like most, if not all of his all of his major scenes, and even some like his less major scenes like make the cut in this movie. And then yeah, that coupled, like that focus on Shiroko combined with his additional experience as an actor, Yeah, I think this is like the best that character is in this movie.
Yeah. So great stuff. Less great stuff. So I knew what was coming with the ending. I knew that like Camille did not psychologically die. I knew that it was a happier ending. But I guess I kind of assumed that Tomino would have put more work into it. That like something would have like, and I think where the warning flashes started like ringing for me, Sean, is Katz dies, and then Rekoa dies, and then Emma dies, and like everyone who dies, and I'm like, how do you do any of this and not do the ending where Camille psychologically dies? Like, I think the scene that was the most powerful for me in this was so. I don't think I said it on the show at the time, but like having seen so much Gundam now, I will firmly say Emma Sheen's death is my favorite death in Gundam. I think her and Camille like have such a great kind of casual relationship over the course of that show, because they are like, it's like a brothers in arms relationship. They are not lovers, but they are real friends who have been like a friendship forged in battle together. And just their final conversation where they know she's dying, there's nothing they can do, they're in that airlock, he makes her this promise, and then he leaves, and it is one of my like 2 or 3 favorite images in all of Gundam is when he repressurizes and her body just floats up lifeless. Amazing. And they keep all that in the movie because it's phenomenal. The problem is, if you keep that in the movie, he has to have his fate. Because the setup of that scene is, I'm going to take on all this pain, and symbolically, I'm not coming back from this. Like, it's really fucking clear that Camille walks out of that airlock knowing he is not surviving this intact. That's just, that is the subtext of that scene, and that is the sadness of it. And so if your ending is, every inch of it is the same, except Paptimus doesn't have his final line about cursing Camille, and then Camille goes, I'll just get a new helmet. It's like, it's so jarring. It's more jarring than any cut between old and new animation in these 3 movies. It is so jarring.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. Like this is something that like I went through like 2 years ago. So like for me, it's just like this fact I've known for a long time of, man, the fucking ending to that movie. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think watched the movies through as movies, is like I just knew that ending sucked. Because and actually I was kind of surprised watching it through all the way, that I didn't think there'd be enough context to be able to justify it, because I knew that the characters died and stuff, because enough of that is reanimated that like, because like Enema's death is reanimated, even if they do like the same sort of general direction on it. Right. And so it's like I knew that they didn't like change that. All those people still die. I was like, there's just no, you can't make this ending work. It just doesn't. You could make the ending work if you changed a lot of what happens leading up to it. I think there is a way to do a more like directly hopeful ending to Zeta Gundam if you set it up that way. But they don't, because they can't. Like if you would have to, that would be, you'd have to reanimate the whole fucking thing. Like I just don't think there's a way for you to change that much of what the ending is without really dramatically changing so much of what the buildup is, enough that you wouldn't be able to reuse all this old footage and stuff. And I suspect that is probably what happened. Like I suspect that Tomino had the idea that he really wanted to try to do this like more hopeful ending to Zeta, because he looked back on it and wanted to do something different that was more in line with like this more hopeful direction he kind of moved in as a creator. But I just don't think there was any way for that to be done without you doing a whole new movie. And so it just kind of feels like they had that idea, they fucking just stuck that ending on there, and it feels so stuck on there. It is such a bizarre, like, because again, almost the entire fight between Paptimus and Camille is just the footage from the original show, including the fucking ramming the goddamn Wave Rider into his goddamn chest. And so you go from that to all of a sudden Camille being like, oh, that was crazy. Man, I gotta get a new helmet. Anyways, looks like we won. And then you have this, like, epilogue where you get, like, a couple of scenes of the white base people on Earth who are also... And that's where you get also, like, a weird whiplash where they're like, oh, I wonder if Katz is doing okay. And you're like, no, he died. He's dead. He's dead with his ghost girlfriend up in space. Like, you're never seeing Katz anymore, Frau. Sorry. It's like... Yeah, there's, like, just something very weird to that where it wants to have this sort of more happy ending, and yet... it's still 99% of it is just the ending to Zeta Gundam, which is dark as shit.
It's also like, even with the problem of everything else is there, it's just kind of an artless version of this. It's literally like, it's all old footage through his helmet breaking, the visor and all of that. And then he has the same reaction where he kind of looks up and looks around and he's like, oh, we won, and it's like, it's just such an abrupt, it would be like if in Victory Gundam, they did like a Victory Gundam trilogy and got to the end, and you have the scene where Katagina comes back and like is talking to, what's her name? The other main girl.
Shakti.
Yeah, Shakti. And Shakti's like, oh, Katagina. And then Katagina turned and went, and then like took her hood off and was like, Shakti, hey! And they're like, yeah, you want to come back to the village? Yeah! And then they go back and have a party. Like, that's what this would be like. It would be like, you do all the same stuff, but then suddenly just a out of left fucking tonal field, like, curveball. It's so weird. It's just fucking weird.
It would be like the end of Char's counterattack, only they push away Axis, and then Amuro and Char both survive, and they look at each other, it's like, Char's just like, you know what? You're right, Amuro. We should believe in the wisdom of humanity. And their Gundam, the new Gundam and the Sazabi fucking hold hands. I know the Sazabi's destroyed at that point, but they hold hands and fly off into space together. And then fucking Beyond the Time starts playing. It's just like, you can't do that. You can't just take the entire thematic thrust of this story and then just all of a sudden at the end be like, and everything was fine. Except for like the 50 people that got murdered in the past 30 minutes.
I really want the fan animation of the Sazabi and the new Gundam holding hands and flying off together with like glitter behind them as Beyond the Time kicks in.
Yeah, a very good ending.
Yeah, because this is basically what it is. I mean, what it really is a very like bad, watered down version of F91, where it is, the idea is like this human connection in space. Oh my God, we survived. I am holding out. I am touching you. Because, like, that physicality means so much to me in this moment. But, like, F91 does that astonishingly well, perfectly. It's one of the best Gundam moments of all time. And this is, like, a pretty pale imitation of that in a story where the F91 ending has no place. Yeah. So that's what it comes down to for me. And then the epilogue, like, I do like seeing Fraubo and Amuro again. That's nice. I feel bad for poor Fraubo, but, it's another scene with her. The Haman Karn stuff is just utterly baffling. I really don't know how to read any of that. Like, because also, like, I feel like this version leans in heavier on the idea that that's not actually Mina Vazabi, which is, like, intimated in Double Zeta. But, like, it has to be her if they're doing the whole thing where she's going to go get educated on Earth. I don't know. It's very weird.
Yeah, the Haman, I'm with you. Like, I don't really understand what the purpose of the Haman stuff is there. Like, it doesn't... Because it's, like... And this became like a little bit of like a controversy is too strong a word, but like it became a discussion in the Gundam fandom after these movies came out of where Double Zeta can't happen with the changes to this ending, right? Because like Haman is not victorious, so there's nobody for like Judo to fight against. There's no reason for the Argama to end up at Shangri-La and pick up Judo. Like, even if there was some reason, Camille is fine and he can just pilot the fucking Double Zeta Gundam if he wanted to. And so it became a like, what's canon now? Like, is there like a new canon going forward? And then ultimately, like, nothing pays attention to it. I think there's like one manga spinoff that like does stuff that's like vaguely references the movie version of the ending, but other than that, like everything has just been like, no, it's just the TV show's the TV show. Because if Double Zeta doesn't happen, then, fucking Char's counterattack doesn't happen. Like, Char has no reason to be the Char in Char's counterattack if fucking Camille is totally fine over there. You feel like he would just go, like, hang out with Camille and, like, kind of relieve some stress, and it would, like, the hopefulness of it means it doesn't feel like there's room for Char to have this, like, apocalyptic attitude of everything must burn down or humanity is doomed because we are, like, chained to this planet.
Exactly. So, yeah. And that's also what confuses me, is they don't resolve Char. There's no, like... Because it's the original Zeta has the ending where the Hyakushiki floats by, and it's like an intimation Char survived. That's not in here. Did I miss it? There's nothing else with Char.
I wasn't paying super close attention to when the ending credits played, so they might have had that shot in there, but
I was paying close attention to the ending credits. I just wondered if there was an Easter egg somewhere else I missed, because they just don't do anything with them, and I thought that was very weird.
Maybe Char died. Yeah, maybe they just blew up Char.
Yeah. Oh well. So maybe this is like a super happy version where Char's counterattack does no double Zeta, no Char's counterattack. This is the end, which actually makes me sad because those are two really good things.
Yeah, and then you just need like the Earth Federation, like president of the Earth Federation, to like drive up to Camille and be like, you know what? We should believe in you, youth, and here we give you like the keys to the kingdom. Basically, you can run the world now, Camille, and like you and your friends, and everything is perfect.
Except all your friends are dead.
Yeah. Except for Katz is dead. Sorry.
Except for Kat, yeah. And Emma and Rekoa and everyone you've cared about in the course of this show, except Fa, who you haven't cared about very well. I mean, okay, here's one thing I do love about the ending, and we have to talk about this. This was the final role of Hirotaka Suzuoki. This is the last time he played Captain Bright. This movie came out in March, and he died in August of 2006 of lung cancer. Mm-hmm. I do think there are a couple of moments where you can hear a little vocal strain in his voice. But overall, it's the same great Hirotaka Suzuoki performance you get every time. And the final lines in A New Translation are, they are listening to Fa and Camille like celebrating outside, the people on the Argama. And one of them offers it up to Bright, like, do you need to hear this? And he says, I can figure out for myself what they're talking about. Who wants to listen to childish nonsense? And that's the end of the movie. And I feel like it's probably impossible that they planned that as a send-off for Suzuoki and Captain Bright. You could not write a better send-off for Suzuoki's performance as Captain Bright than that line about childish nonsense. Yeah. It's beautiful and perfect. Yeah, I do love that moment.
Yeah, it's very good, and it definitely is like it feels like the Bright you get in Double Zeta, right? Where he has that like twinkle in his eye as he says it, because he's like, he now fully believes in the generation to come. Because that is like one of the things about the ending. Like, I think it's like the ending is totally inappropriate for the story that they told, but like that whole scene of the crew of the Argama like listening in, and the one dude, the comms dude, like doing impressions of their voices as he's hearing them, like I think that scene fucking is great. It just doesn't fit into this movie.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. This was the last time Hirotaka Suzuoki would be in Gundam. This is also the last time Daisuke Gori would be in Gundam. He is not huge in Gundam, but he does play...
he's Basque Om, right?
He's Basque Om, but he's Dozel Zabi in Gundam, the TV show. In the movies, I don't know why, but in the movies it's Tesho Genda. Tesho Genda is also wonderful. They're both very good versions of Dozel Zabi, but he was Dozel in the original Gundam. And then he's Basque Om in Zeta, and he returns as Basque Om here. He's really good in these three movies. Like, I feel like Basque Om gets just also like foregrounded a little bit more, and there's some new scenes with Basque Om, and I mean, Daisuke Gori, I've probably talked about him on the show before. If you don't know, Daisuke Gori is just like one of my favorite actors of all time, voice or otherwise, and not a day goes by I am not sad that he is no longer with us. It breaks my fucking heart. He was a tremendous actor, and he died a couple years after this movie, but this would have been the last Gundam thing he did, other than maybe a video game, if Basque Om was in a video game. But yeah, so kind of melancholy in that sense. There's a couple actors in this that are no longer with us.
Yeah. I'm trying to other stuff about the ending. Like, one thing that is weird about the ending is, I remember, so, they do all the ghost stuff thing where it's like Camille has the visions of all the people he's met who have died, that have helped him out. And then in that mix, they don't cut out Rosamia, so she's just there still. And I found that very funny, because in the movie version, the only time she shows up is in the end of the first movie. I think she's like in an action scene of the second movie as well. But like, you never get the like, she's been brainwashed to think that Camille is her big brother, or like all that shit from the TV show. Like, that's just not there. You never see her die. So I find it very funny that they didn't try to like find some way to cut out that shot of Rosamia in the ghost people, because it's like, wait, why are you here? If you watch this without ever having seen the TV show, you'd be very confused about who that was.
Yes. Yeah. I was slightly confused, Sean, because I had forgotten the Rosamia stuff. I'm going to be perfectly honest. Someone made a point about that on Twitter, and I had to go look up, like, wait, who was Rosamia? And then I remembered it. But, like, off the top of my head, I could not tell you that. It is indeed the weakest part of Zeta Gundam. Although it works okay in the show. Yeah. Would not have worked in the movie. They made the right choice.
No, this would have been a very, very tedious movie if they tried to do all the Rosamia stuff.
Any other thoughts on the movies themselves? I have one other thing I wanted to talk about really quick.
Yeah, because that was the thing I was going to bring up, because I assume you want to talk about Char's line from the beginning of 3?
Oh, I had forgotten about that. I had a different thing, but yeah, we can talk about the line.
Because you did a whole Twitter detective thing you did with the dialogue that I assumed you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so they're not that in depth, but I just looked at. So Char has the famous. We both, Sean, you agreed with me on this when I said this line is the Rosetta Stone of Char Aznable.
Yep.
It's when you are on the ship with Haman Karn and they're breaking out, and Char has the gun pointed at Haman, and she says, "So you're betraying us?" And he says, in the original TV show, he says, "I have never even once betrayed anyone, Haman." And in Japanese, what he says is, "Moto moto watashi wa uragiri wa issai shite inayo, Haman." And that is a pretty literal translation to say, "I have never." He is like. There are multiple points in that phrasing where he is saying, like, from the beginning, never ever have I done this ever, Haman, and like it is punctuated with her name. Like, it is extremely insistent.
Yeah, it's a very hard emphasis he puts on. I have never once betrayed anybody.
Yeah, in the movie, and it stands out because it's the reanimated shot in this sequence. Is Char says, "Moto moto watashi wa uragite wa inai," which is just a much more like plain. You said I betrayed someone. I have not betrayed anyone.
Yeah.
And even you can listen also, like, Shuichi Ikeda's inflection is much plainer. Like, he's been directed to do it like less. Like, he says it indignantly in Zeta Gundam. It's more plain here.
Yeah, the line delivery is very intense in the TV show. Partially because I mean we'll talk about it, but like it becomes at like near the end of that episode. Like it is like one of like the major like climactic points of the story of that episode, which is mostly from Char's POV.
Yes. It's early in the movie, obviously. It's the opening sequence. It happens 5 minutes into the movie. But I just found it interesting because it's a famous line, and it is notable that it is like the one shot in that sequence that, like, okay, a choice was clearly made. We want this line different, and we want it different enough that we're going to pay for the 5 seconds of animation to do it. And I just find it interesting. I don't know. I can't quite square the circle of why Tomino chose to do that. I wonder if, like, he saw all the memes and, like, thought he didn't want this memed either. I don't know. It just kind of was like, it takes a moment that is, like, so powerful and iconic and kind of neuters it, I thought.
Yeah, I've like, there's no, like, I did a little bit of digging around, like, not expecting to find anything, but there's no, like, indication that, like, there isn't, like, an indication that, like, broadly speaking, that the fandom like puts as much emphasis on the scene as we do. Like, I think people like the scene, but it's not like the like when people do an impression of Char, they don't do that line. They do the like, let's see what the abilities of this so-called Earth Federation suit are, or like one never wants to reflect on the mistakes of their youth, like those lines from the original Gundam. So it's like it is a great scene, but it's not necessarily like the Gundam scene for Char in terms of like the broader fandom. My assumption is that the reason why they made that change is entirely just because that scene comes in like the first 5 minutes of the movie, and it would I suspect they're like, it would feel inappropriate for a character that they have not put a huge amount of emphasis on, Char, in the movie version, to have here's this big intense moment with this character at the very beginning of this movie that also is not really going to be picked up on that much in the movie because Char's in Haman's stuff is relatively de-emphasized compared to her relationship to Shirako and her relationship to Camille. And that's my guess. I'm guessing that they just didn't want to, like, at the beginning of the movie, have like this big like mic drop of a moment with Char that just kind of comes out of nowhere shortly after the opening credits.
I think that's fair, and it's just... But it's also distracting because you expect, if you'd seen the show, you expect it to come, and it is very odd that like just Char's side of the conversation is reanimated, and he's talking to a animated figure from 1985, but he is from 2005. It's very odd,
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a weird moment. Like, it was one I was like waiting for, and then he said it, and I was like, oh, that's not what it is. Because it's like, I didn't look up what the line of dialogue was, but I'm like, I'm pretty sure that he's like said a lot more in like, it was like, it's because it's also like the animation. Like, if you look back at like that scene in the original TV show, like he's got this fucking scowl on his face where you see the man underneath all of that just like has this intense conviction about the way he understands himself that comes through there. The man who always wears his mask in there, the mask comes off.
Yes. Well, if you look at my tweet, I have the screenshots, and it's also much closer in. You are really close in on his face. And in the movie version, it's like a medium shot. There are not these like wrinkles under his eyes where he's scowling. It's It's just a normal Char line, and that's fine. But yeah, it does take away something extraordinary from that scene. Yeah. That's okay.
All it does to me is like point me back to be like, oh, I should go watch that scene again, and I watch the scene again. Yes. Like, fucking god damn it, this moment is so good in the TV show.
Yes,
and I think even if they tried to play it the same way in the movie, I don't think it would have worked, because it's like you haven't built him up in this movie in this way. Like, it's just like you don't have that connection to Char within the context of what they've done with the movie version.
Yes, so I agree with all that. All right. Here's one other thing I wanted to bring up, though, Sean. This is kind of a thought experiment.
Okay.
I made a note on Twitter while I was watching these movies that I think it would be... I do kind of regret that we do not have a double Zeta movie trilogy the way we do for the first two shows. And someone said, oh, but double Zeta would be really hard. And I think the exact opposite. I think double Zeta would be fairly easy to do.
It'd be way easier than Zeta, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for one, double Zeta is a little shorter. It's 46 full episodes. There's the prelude episode that obviously you wouldn't have in there. I think there's a bunch of stuff in Double Zeta that are like very easy cuts. There's all the like Phantom Colony stuff. All the opening stuff in Shangri-La you could cut down very easily into like a 30-minute first act. And then like I also think the break points are relatively clear to me. Like, I'm looking over the episode list again, Sean, and if you start with Shangri-La, and then, the second half of that movie is off into space, I think the obvious, like, climax to that movie is when Judo goes rogue and goes off to try to save Lena, and probably ending with him, like, meeting Play on, and, like, encountering Judo and all of that stuff before he gets back to the Argama. It's, like, about 18 episodes, but again, a lot of that is the stuff on Shangri-La where you can, like, I would go up to episode 18 specifically, which is called Play and Axis, which is all of that stuff, and it ends with Judo back on the ship and the Argama retreating from Haman. And then at that point you would start the second movie around episode 19, which is where you have Argama going to Granada and getting their new orders for the first time, and so you have like this direction. You could build that second movie largely around the relationship between Judo and Play and the other like characters that are there, because you have a lot of good character relationship stuff. And then you have a super obvious climax in the Dublin colony drop, which is also where Play dies. And so you have a real clear spine to that second movie. And then your spine to the third movie is the Nahal Argama and the new ship that they have, and the kids going off on their own, and the final battle with Haman, and all the stuff with, what's his face?
Glemmy Toto?
Yeah, Glemmy Toto. So I just feel like, if they ever want to do it, I feel like the trilogy structure is super clear. It's also a very well animated show. I would not mind seeing Tomino do that one day, just to complete the like trifecta, and maybe make people look at Double Zeta again. And I feel like Double Zeta is one that would like, I think its reputation might be restored in some circles if you had a like focused version of it to point to like that could get people to reassess it. So that is my pitch for a Double Zeta trilogy.
Yeah, I agree with your like where you would do like start and stop those movies. There is no way in hell they will ever do it. Like, that's
no,
like, it's just partially like, like, I feel like regardless of like the fact that Double Zeta is not held up to that as high of regard as Zeta, like, you just don't do, I mean, you just, generally speaking, you don't do compilation movies for like ongoing TV anime now anyways, because like anime production doesn't do, here's like a 50 episode TV show. Like, it's incredibly rare. The most you almost ever get is something that is 25 episodes. That then you'll come back for like 2 years later, then you'll get the next 25 episodes in My Hero Academia or something like that. So I think our hopes of a Double Zeta Gundam movie will never come to be.
I don't need it. I'm just saying, like, I mean, ultimately you should go watch the show because it's a great fucking show.
Yeah.
But you can make something very good out of it, and I think it's too bad that doesn't exist. But it's fine. The show exists. It's great. It's perfect. Well, it's not perfect, but it's very, very good.
Very, very good. Yeah.
Very, very good. Top shelf Gundam. All right. Before we close today, Sean, I think we need to talk about the future of Weekly Suit Gundam, because there's some exciting stuff coming.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess this actually segues from what I was just saying of, they don't make anime like they used to, by which I mean they realized at some point in the mid-2000s, maybe we can't make 52 episodes of animation, or like 50 to 52 episodes of animation in a year. That's fucking madness. Let's leave that for like the One Pieces of the world that, like, we have these like weird anime factories that just like make one weekly episode of One Piece or Sazae-san or like whatever the fuck is going to go on forever and ever and ever, Boruto. But most animation moves away from the structure, the 4-core show or the like year-long running show that is kind of like the root of where Gundam, the tradition Gundam comes out of, and instead moves into where the next phase of Gundam is the modern anime industry, where you now have what is much more common, which is 2-core shows, meaning about 24 to 26 episodes, and then you have multiple quote-unquote seasons of that, and that's where Gundam goes. So in respect of that, looking at Mobile Suit Gundam 00, which is the next Gundam show in the timeline, that show airs what is effectively 2 seasons of about 24 episodes apiece, but in the middle is a time jump. And this is the same structure that Iron-Blooded Orphans uses, and 00 Gundam also has a movie, Waking of the Trailblazer, at the end. So we're going to treat those as basically their own episodes of the podcast. So we will have 3 episodes on Mobile Suit Gundam 00. The first one tackling that first season, quote unquote. Like if you see it referred to as, it's like we in the West will refer to them as seasons. So season 1 is Mobile Suit Gundam 00, and then we'll do an episode on season 2, and then we'll do an episode on the movie as well. That is also how we will handle Iron-Blooded Orphans for sure, the Sans of the movie, because there isn't one. And that might be also how we do Gundam Age. Actually, I would have to look at it because I don't remember how the episode counts break down. But Gundam Age has something that is fairly similar, so we'll probably
It's definitely a 2-season split. I've looked it up. I don't know if it's as big a split, but
yeah, Gundam Age, it's like the structure of Gundam Age is slightly weird. So like I would have to think about it for a second to see if we would want to split it up slightly differently. But I think we'll probably just do that in 2.
But the upside is you guys are going to be getting more episodes faster because we can watch 24 episodes faster than we can watch 50. And it's going to be a little kind of like going back to our roots, Sean, where we did Gundam like in episode chunks, where for Gundam 00 Season 1, I will have seen Season 1, but I won't have seen Season 2. So that'll be kind of, we'll have that like newbie veteran split a little more, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, I'm very excited for doing it this way. I mean, I'm extraordinarily excited to watch Gundam 00 because it's one I've wanted to rewatch for quite some time. It's, we're going widescreen. We're going fucking HD, baby. It is a thing where in my head, like, Mobile Suit Gundam 00 and Sea Destiny were made like 10 years apart because it's like the gap between like the style is so huge. And then this is what the other great thing about it is that we're now like, with the modern era of anime, I guess you could have done this with Seed and Sea Destiny for the HD version, but 00 is also available on streaming services. So if you have Crunchyroll, you can get 00 there as well. So if you want to keep up with us and want to watch it on a streaming service, you can do it there, which is how I'm going to watch it.
I think everything we are covering for the foreseeable future is on streaming services, is on Crunchyroll, other than maybe the 00 movie and the OVA version of the Origin, I don't think is.
Yeah.
But you can, but the OVA version of the Origin is on Blu-ray. You can find it very easily. So we've got lots of good stuff coming, and like I said, probably more episodes. Maybe 2 a month instead of 1 a month. We'll see how we go. But I am going to be starting that show tonight, probably because I am extremely excited, and that should be coming soon.
Yes. So next time on Weekly Suit Gundam, we will be covering episodes 1 to 25 of Mobile Suit Gundam 00, or as I like to call it in my head because I find it very funny, 00 Gundam.